To also welcome this evening our observers from CARICOM, OAS, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the OECS. I thank them for having been with us over the last few days when we've had these consultations. I wish now to invite the Attorney General to present an overview of the report, and then we will open up the floor for comments. So, Attorney General.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Or Chairperson, I think, is perhaps the more appropriate terminology. Members of Cabinet, observers who are here with us, as identified by the Chairperson a moment ago, from the Organization of American States, the CARICOM, the OECS, and the Commonwealth Secretariat. Welcome. Other guests and participants here tonight, and perhaps more particularly those of you who are listening and engaged virtually. Good night. As you heard from the Chairperson a moment ago, there are a number of areas that are addressed by the report of Sedenis, and the purpose of this consultation is obviously to allow those who wish to make views known to do so. And indeed, a number of areas, some more important to some people than others, are raised in the report. My role is to identify a few of those areas that I suggest are of importance, and to invite you to speak to those and any other issues that you wish to speak to, or indeed not to speak to any of those that I mentioned at all, if you think that that is appropriate. This presentation is simply a short overview of the report. And as you may know, if you have read the report, Sedenis provided his report in two phases. Phase one of the report, as Sedenis indicated, is focused on the cleansing of the voters list. And that report is accompanied by two pieces of draft legislation or proposed legislation, namely the Registration of Electors Act 2023 and the Registration of Electors Regulations of 2023. Largely, those drafts reflect the existing law, but there are a few areas in which Sedenis has made recommendations which find themselves reflected in the new drafts. Phase two of the report addresses primarily access to the media, campaign financing, the Electoral Commission, and election petitions. And phase two is accompanied by four pieces of legislation, which I'll refer to a little later. Turning now to phase one. The phase one report is structurally similar to the existing act, and there are it makes a few recommendations for changes, and these recommendations are in relation to identification cards, in relation to residency, in relation to registration, and in relation to investigation. It also makes recommendation in relation to confirmation, and I'll deal with each of those in turn. Residency is essentially the same as now exists, but there are two elements to it. The first element, which is exactly the same as that which now exists, is that a person is required to live in a constituency for a minimum period of 3 months, a continuous period of 3 months, immediately preceding the point at which the person makes the application to be registered in order to be able to register to vote. So that is to say, if someone is living in a particular polling district, is not registered and wishes to be registered, and they have only lived there for 2 months, and they present themselves requesting to be registered, they ought to be turned away because they would not have satisfied the 3-month registration residency requirement. That requirement is dealt with at clause 71C of phase of the new Registration of Electors Act, and it is, as I said, essentially the same as what exists today. However, there is a second element of residency, which, although it exists today, has been suggested by Sir Dennis that it be significantly changed. That second element relates to what is termed in the existing legislation and indeed in the new draft as absence from Dominica. So the existing provision provides that a person who is registered, so that's a person who has already been registered and leaves the state, if they remain out of the state for more than 5 years, that is, they're absent from Dominica for more than 5 years, they are deemed to have been outside of the jurisdiction for a period that requires that they should be removed from the register of electors. That has caused some debate, and there are different views, but essentially what that means is that if a person were to be registered and to live abroad, and they came to Dominica on any occasion, even if it was once, during that 5-year period, that's as the law now exists, they would be entitled to continue to remain on the register and to vote. The proposal that Sir Dennis makes would significantly change that. And Sir Dennis's proposal is that if a person lives out of Dominica, a person who is registered, lives out of Dominica and does not return to Dominica and spend a minimum of 90 days, or he suggests an alternative of 50 days, in Dominica within that 5-year period, that person should be removed from the register. I think it should be fairly obvious that 1 day or even half a day or some hours and 90 days is a vast difference. So that's the point, of course, that there will be various views on. And I suspect, since we're dealing with the diaspora, that the diaspora will have its own particular views, and maybe we'll hear from you on that. That provision that Sir Dennis is recommended is at clause 26.1 of the new registration of electors. Section 26.1, the new provision that Sir Dennis is proposing, has a knock-on effect on 3 other provisions. Those are clause 12b(2), which provides for a person to remain on the register, which would now be changed to mean that a person would have to spend at least 90 or alternatively 50 days. And the 2 other provisions are clause 13.4b and 15.3b, which would similarly be affected in that a person would have to be removed from the register if they spent less than 90 days in Dominica during that 5-year period. So that's the first element, i.e. residency. The second element of registration is unchanged, other than that Sir Dennis proposes that 17-year-olds should be allowed to apply to have their names, to apply for registration, but their name would not be placed on the register until they attain the age of 18 years. That would be a new change from the existing position where a person has to wait until they're 18 years of age to be registered and indeed to apply, as it currently stands. The second recommended change is that state employees who are stationed overseas, diplomatic workers and so forth, would, provided they had given prior notice by way of declaration to the chief registering officer, they would be deemed to reside at the address that they would have declared to the chief registering officer. Those 2 changes are clauses 7.2 and 7.3 of the new proposed legislation. The third element is identification cards, and that is obviously an important issue. It's an issue which there's been much debate about over the years. The change that would be made by way of the recommendations put forward by Sir Dennis is that identification cards would now become mandatory. The use of identification cards would become mandatory and not merely something that was left to the chief registering officer to determine whether he felt it was appropriate to implement them or not. There are other matters that are associated with that, but essentially it is the mandatory requirement of the use of identification cards that is the significant change. This consultation and others may, of course, wish to consider, and it already has been considered in some of the previous consultation sessions, whether an identification card would be the only means of a person being able to vote. In other words, somebody who didn't have their identification card with them and attended at the polling booth, would they be allowed to, or should they be allowed to vote if they had some other form of identification? For example, a driver's license or a passport, or some government-issued identification card or some other form of identification. And if they were to be able to use such alternative identification, would that be confined to a situation where certain criteria existed or had to be met? Those are matters that may be considered, and the identification card mandatory requirement is at clause 11 of the new provisions. The fourth element is as it relates to investigations and of the names and other circumstances in respect to information necessary to ensure that the voters list or the register is accurate. And clauses 9 and 10 of the new provisions provides greater investigatory power to the chief registering officer and electoral officials. It also enables them to have greater power to gather information. And thirdly, and perhaps of some importance, it creates a new offense, namely the offense of refusing to furnish information requested or providing false information to the chief registering officer. That is to say, if the chief registering officer or an election official seeks or requests information from a person and that person in inappropriate circumstances refuses to furnish the information requested or provides false information, they would be liable to be found guilty of committing an offense and face the appropriate penalty as provided for in the legislation. The third element in relation to registration is the information that it would now be required to be provided by public officers. Clause 27 requires that public officers, I should say specified public officers, because the draft legislation sets out a number of officers who would be required to provide information to the chief registering officer for the purposes of ensuring that the lists were accurate. Those officers would include Permanent Secretary and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who would be required to provide certain information in respect to officers who are serving overseas. The Chief of Police would be required to provide certain information in respect to people who are traveling in and out of Dominica, let's say for immigration-related information. The Chairman of the Mental Health Review Board would be required to provide information, as it states in the draft, in respect of each person who has been certified as having a mental disorder as defined under the Mental Health Act. And the information is the name of the person, their street address, their date of birth, and their occupation. And it is noteworthy that the Mental Health Act defines mental health order as mental illness or mental deficiency, however caused or manifested. There was some discussion in the previous consultation as regards the appropriateness of that particular provision, and it may well be that we will hear some further discussion about that provision and some of the others tonight. The final element in relation to verification is the confirmation process is provided for. That's a new development entirely. We don't have that in the law as it exists. And what that would provide is that it would empower the Electoral Commission to declare a period during which the confirmation shall take place, to facilitate the confirmation of registration of persons who are overseas during the confirmation period, should that decision be taken, to ensure that adequate resources are made available to carry out the confirmation process in an efficient and timely manner, and prescribe regulations to give full effect to the provisions of the Registration of Electors Act relating to confirmation of registration of electors. Now, confirmation has some important elements that I think you would wish to be aware of if you haven't yet identified those in your own reading. It will require that not later than 30 days after the Registration of Electors Act would have been enacted, that is passed by Parliament and having received the assent of the President, within 30 days of that, according to the draft as it now stands, the Commission, the Electoral Commission, would be required to declare a confirmation period. That confirmation period, according to the proposed legislation, would be required to be of no less than 6 months duration, but equally, it could be extended, but for no more than a total of 9 months. That's the total period in relation to the confirmation would be or could be 9 months. So that is to say, if you are overseas now, you are on the register. Once the confirmation period was declared, if you wished to remain on the register, you would be required to confirm that desire. And the legislation provides what you'd need to do to do that in terms of really presenting yourself and certain information to the electoral officials. Now, one of the areas of debate is whether confirmation should take place entirely in Dominica, that is to say everybody should have to come to Dominica to confirm, or whether it should be both in Dominica and for those who wish to and were able to make use of it at certain locations abroad. For example, at the various countries and cities and states where Dominica has an diplomatic presence at the moment. There may be other suggestions, and that may be an area that you may wish to make comment on and suggestions this evening. The second phase of Sir Dennis's report is really focused on what he describes as institutional matters, and essentially those are access to the media, use of electronic voting systems, campaign financing, and election petitions. And Phase 2 is supported by 4 pieces of legislation, as I said earlier. Those are namely the House of Assembly Elections Act 2023, House of Assembly Elections Regulations 2023, House of Assembly Election Petition Rules 2023, and the Electoral Commission Bill 2023. For the purpose of the discussion at this point in time, access to the media is at Part 3 of the House of Assembly Elections Act. Use of electronic voting system is at Part 4. Campaign financing is addressed at Part 5. Election petitions at Part 7. And access to the media, as the name suggests, would be a provision and a new development in our electoral landscape, which would provide that every political party and independent candidate would be required to be provided with access to state-owned media during the campaign period. I suppose the other significant factor is that insofar as the proposal is concerned, that would be confined to state-owned media and would not apply to privately owned media insofar as the recommendation is concerned. Electronic voting systems. So Dennis proposes that electronic voting systems should be introduced, or voting should be conducted by way of electronic voting systems at an appropriate point. I think, as I understand his report, he is of the view that at the moment we do not have in place a system which is up and running and tested and that what he suggests is that that's an aspiration that we should move to as quickly as possible. The third element under phase 2 is campaign financing, which Sir Dennis proposes that political parties and independent candidates should be constrained by certain rules governing how much they can receive individually and as a party for purposes of election campaigning. And those provisions are set out. It also requires that the parties and the candidates would be required to keep financial records and to produce those records when required, and indeed to provide reports on an annual basis. Those are audited reports. And the Electoral Commission would be given the power to publish those reports if it so chooses. It also provides for offences and penalties, and those penalties range between $6,000 or 12 months imprisonment in respect to a Clause 57 free offence, up to $10,000 or 12 months imprisonment for a Clause 70 offence. And finally, the Electoral Commission, so Dennis makes recommendations in relation to the Electoral Commission, a number of them. One of them is that he proposes that there should be the Electoral Commission Act should be introduced to Dominica, and that act should address things like financial autonomy of the Electoral Commission, providing that a fund be established, which he suggests be called an Electoral Commission Fund, and that fund be replenished on an annual basis by payments of a specified amount into that fund from the consolidated fund, that is from the state funds. And thirdly, he suggests a provision for administration of that fund. He also suggests that the Commission should have a greater level of autonomy in relation to the appointment of staff. And he also proposes that members of the Commission, members of committees that are supporting the Commission, the Chief Elections Officer, and any employee of the Commission should be required to disclose any private interest that he or she may have in a matter that is being considered by the Commission. Those are some of the significant recommendations and provisions, and there are many others. Most of them are perhaps, certainly in my view, not very significant. But as I said at the outset, if you take a different view, then I suggest that you advance those tonight so that they can be considered along with all others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, AG, for the overview of the report. And I would like to open up the floor for comments. Everyone has the opportunity to speak. We ask that you keep your interventions to the point so that everyone has the opportunity to provide their views and perspectives on the report. You are requested to raise your virtual hand if you wish to take the floor, and then you will be admitted to do so. I ask that we respect the points of view of everybody who speaks, and that we ensure that we clearly indicate our point, and we allow others to share their point of view as well. I believe that, did we put up, Capsec, you said there were some rules that you have put up? There are some guidelines, I think, that are being shared on the screen. We ask that you always be polite and considerate. And we've lost it. Right. That we don't share inappropriate content. Please indicate your name before you share your own thoughts, and please use the virtual raise hand as I indicated. And if you have no microphone capabilities and still would like your contribution to be read for you, please indicate that using the hand function. Sorry, using the chat function, sorry. Yes. So the floor is open, and please raise your hand if you would like to take the floor. Sorry? Okay. Mr. Douglas, you have the floor. Debbie Douglas.
Okay, my
Yeah,
name
you
is
have the
Debbie
floor.
Douglas. I live in Canada. I have dual citizenship with Canada and Dominica. I know there are a lot of people who would like to talk. I really just want to raise the first issue for me is the issue of people in the diaspora voting in Dominican elections. I'm of the view that people who don't live in Dominica should not vote in elections. Why? For example, I live in Canada, I pay taxes in Canada. I don't see why I should be able to come to Dominica and elect a government where I don't pay taxes, and neither do I have to live under the policies of this government. So once I've voted out, I then take a one-way ticket back, and whatever policies the government enacted, whether it's the UWP or the Labour Party, I don't have to live under those conditions. In fact, I would be living under conditions of the Canadian government. So my father, the late Prime Minister Rosie Douglas, felt that in order for Dominica to develop, the diaspora should be able to participate in the country's development. And what he meant by that is that we have a lot of people in the diaspora with a lot of educational skills profession, and we really have a brain drain in Dominica, and you can't develop a country without your human resource. But you know what he felt is that the diaspora should probably have two constituencies. So you have, let's say, two constituencies, you call them, let us say, you know, Dominica North or Dominica South. And therefore you could have diaspora voting for those two constituencies plus the 21. And in that regard, the diaspora can feel connected. But at the same time, though, those two seats will not alter the electoral results. And that to me would be fair. But with respect to Sir Byron's policy that residency, that someone from the diaspora could just come once every 5 years, that to me is just you know, unacceptable, doesn't make any sense. And all due respect to, you know, the learned jurist, Sir Byron, I'm very surprised he would suggest such a thing. I mean, residency should be, in my opinion, minimum 6 months. Someone coming for, like in the last 5 years once, as I've done, that person really is just coming on a vacation. You can't really have such a person vote in an election that will alter, again, the results of the election in Dominica for the people who live there. And so I don't want to go on talking, but that to me, I feel very strongly about. We've had over the years, people from the diaspora coming to just to vote and leaving in 2-3 days. That is unfair to people who live in Dominica, who have to live under the policy of the government that's elected, whether it's the Labour Party or the UWP. I'm non-partisan as far as this goes. So there are other things I would like to talk about, but because I know there are a lot of people who want to give their point of view, I am going to give the floor to the other Dominicans in the diaspora so they can express their views. Thank you very much for allowing me to give my 2 cents.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Ms. Douglas. We would like to give the floor to Mr. Darren Sylvester. Mr. Sylvester, can you unmute? Can you come in, please? And if you're comfortable with putting on your camera, please do so.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Good evening to Good evening to everyone. I'm from London, England, Darren Sylvester. I have a couple of questions regarding phase 1 of Sir Dennis Byron's report, which is clause 13 of his proposed registration of electors bill states that the existing list shall be adopted as the first register of electors. And my reading of clause 51.1 states that the confirmation period will not exceed 9 months. But to my mind, surely a re-registration process is easier, as the Chief Registration Officer will only be adding new registrations under that process, as opposed to a confirmation whereby they will be confirming registrations and deleting registrations. So I just wanted to put that there because the PM said yesterday he would like this process tied up as quickly as possible. And it seems to me that the re-registration process is much quicker than a confirmation process. My second point is that clause 57 of the Registration of Electors Bill seeks to repeal the existing Register of Electors Act, which is in chapter 2.03. Again, it's not clear to me why new legislation would have the hangover of an old voters list. And to my mind, it is surely better to have those eligible to vote to re-register using the Form 2, which is found in the Register of Electors Regulations 2003, as drafted by Sir Dennis Byron. My third point is clause 16 of the Registration of Electors Bill sets out the quarters, and by quarters I mean the 1st of December, the 1st of March, the 1st of June, and the 1st of September in any year, for information to be received by the Chief Registration Officer for additions or corrections to be made to the list. So my question is, why is real-time information not used via technology, especially when clause 33 of the Registration of Electors Bill refers to a technology-enabled voter registration system? And my final point is clause 54 of the Registration of Electors Bill states that confirmation of registration shall be carried out by means of a technology-enabled voter registration system. And my question is, why does clause 52 of the same bill suggest that enrollment centers in overseas locations could facilitate the confirmation of registration of persons who may live overseas? I hope those points may generate some discussion and ventilation of ideas. Thank you.
Very much for your contribution, Mr. Sylvester. I just wanted to, well, I'm not going to respond to all of the points now. Your points are being captured for consideration. Just to speak very briefly on the question of re-registration and confirmation, they do have different effects. So, for example, in relation to re-registration, you would be starting from scratch with an entirely new list. If you choose confirmation as opposed to re-registration, then with confirmation you're working from the list that already exists, and then everybody is required to indicate that they are qualified to continue to be on the register. If you choose re-registration, then everybody must register anew. So it means, for example, that persons who are currently on the register now and are properly on the register and eligible to vote, and they live in the diaspora, if you move towards re-registration, those persons would not be able to qualify to be on the register because they're required to reside in a constituency for a period of at least 3 months. So you would, in effect, be disenfranchising quite a large number of Dominicans who live in the diaspora if you choose to do a full re-registration process as opposed to a confirmation process. So as I indicated, your other points are noted as well. I just thought that I would just give you an explanation as to the different effects of re-registration versus confirmation. I would like to give the floor now to Ms. Shirley Samuel. Ms. Shirley Samuel, you have the floor. Please indicate where you're calling from, and if you feel comfortable with having your camera on, please put it on. Go ahead, please.
Okay, good night, good night, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly. Good night, ma'am.
Good night. I'm driving, so it's a bit difficult for me. I call from the US. My name is Shirley Samuel, and I'm calling from the US.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Since I do not have the copy of Sir Byron's report, I cannot make reference any of what he spoke about. But listening to the discussions, because I've been listening to the discussions for the past few days, I do not believe that anyone who is registered, duly registered on the voters list should be removed from that voters list. I disagree. We are all Dominicans and we should all remain on the voters list. If there are persons in the diaspora who have died or whatever, the families should inform the Dominica, the electoral office, to inform them and tell them, let them know so that their names can be removed from that list. But I do not agree that our names should be removed from the voters list. That's number one. Number two, all parties or persons who want to run for elections should raise their own funds. Our country is too small for us to take money from the government, from the treasury, to give people to run election. I disagree to this thing completely. In America, I listen to everything that is happening in Dominica. And sometimes it hurts to hear the kind of negative things that are being said by politicians about our island. It really hurts. If you are trying to destroy the island, say so many bad things about the island, why should the island take its money? People working hard so that our treasury can get money. Why should we take that money instead of developing the island? If we take it and give it to you to go and run politics, everyone should raise their own funds to do their campaign. That is my idea. When Douglas was opposition in government, he went all about trying to get assistance for Dominica. I have not seen that from the opposition parties. After Hurricane Maria, I did not see what they do. What did they do to assist? They do not assist, they do not help, they do not do anything. Why should the country take its money and give to them to go and run politics? This is just absolute nonsense. I disagree to that. Everyone who wants to go into politics should raise their own funds, number one. Number two, they should be educated. They should be educated. There are too many people going for elections and it's, when you listen to them, oh my God, it's a real shame. So they should have some sort of education in order to go into politics. This is my contribution, and it would really pain me to see that I live in the US. I take part in everything that is happening in Dominica. I know everything that is happening. I send money, send everything down, and then my name have to be removed from the list of the registers list. It's not fair. It's just not fair to me at all. Not fair, and I disagree to this. This is my contribution. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Tell you that the report is available on the government website, dominica.gov.dm. So if you want to see the full report, you can go to the government website and you can get a copy of it. And if you have further comments, then you can send your comments to the Cabinet Secretary. I believe that the address for doing that is in the chat, or it will be put into the chat. Thank you very much, ma'am. Can we please have Rufin Ruthin, if you choose, you can put your camera on, but please, you have the floor. Share your contribution. Are you there? Unmute your mic. Can you unmute your mic, please, Ruthin? Are we able to unmute the mic for her? Ruthin, whilst we try to sort that out for you, then we'll go to the next person and we'll come back to you. Miss Nelissa Thomas or Mrs. Nelissa Thomas, can you unmute the mic and share your observations with us, please? Let us know where you're calling from, where you're speaking from.
Okay, my name is Melissa Thomas, and I'm calling from the U.S. Virgin Islands, preferably St. Croix.
Okay, good night. Please go ahead.
Okay, first point I have to give tonight is that I have the point of view that once you are on the voters list, you should remain. No term limits. No term limits. You're just there. You are Dominican. You are a registered voter. You're a registered voter. Because there are many circumstances that happen to people while they're overseas, and they are unable to come to Dominica at the time, 5 years or 10 years. So we should consider that. My next point is, I think voters' ID card is a waste of money. Because you just only use it to go and vote, just to vote. But if we have a national ID card, you could go anywhere, and you could go in the bank, you could go anywhere. A government national ID card, you could use it, because in the Virgin Islands, you don't even a driver's license you use. So, and my next point, I have a lot of points, My next point is that we should turn to electronic voting and the traditional way, because remember, we have the elderly who are not too versed in this computerized world, or in the internet. So we should stick to the electronic and the traditional way. Okay, I think that's yeah. That's my point. Thank you. I think I have more, but let me just,
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas, and you can always come back in later on if you have more points that you would like to share. We want to go back to Ruthin to see if we can hear from her now. Ruthin, are you able to unmute your mic now? Okay, great. Ruthin, go ahead, please.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. My name is Ruthin Codrington. I'm from Portsmouth, Dominica. And I think that in lieu of the diaspora people voting, I think that's a brilliant idea. I think that many of us don't have an opportunity to vote, and we should. Because remember, whether we are diaspora or not, and we come often, because we come for a reason. Dominica is our place of birth. And so we should be allowed to vote. And I agree that if someone has not landed in Dominica in 5 years, if they were registered, they should be removed from the registry and then have the opportunity to re-register when they enter back in Dominica. In terms of the 17-year-old being able to apply to vote, it really doesn't make any sense if they can only vote at age 18. So why not leave it at age 18 for them to vote, as opposed to allowing them to apply at 17 and have to wait until they turn 18. And that's my 2 questions that I have.
Thank you for your contribution, Ruthin. I just wanted to ask you, you said you're from Portsmouth, but do you live in the diaspora?
Yes, I do.
Could you tell us where you live?
I live between Florida and Dominica. I'm in Dominica very often.
Okay. And just to inform you that every contribution is being properly recorded, So we are taking note of your suggestions
Yes,
and your comments. Thank you very much.
great.
Can we please have Dion George now, please? Can you unmute your mic? And let us know where you're joining us from.
Yeah, I'm joining you from Atlanta, and thank you so much for taking my call. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Yes, and so I want to thank you for having this discussion. I think it's a healthy discussion and would allow persons to view their opinions. And so firstly, I would like to disagree with the callers that call from St. Thomas or St. Croix that said that persons can vote independently regardless where they live. Now, I say that now in a very careful way. What I mean by that is if one is a resident in the state of Georgia and one were to move to New York, that person has to gain what is called residency in that state for them to vote. It cannot be a double dip. You cannot vote in Georgia, then vote in New York. And I believe as respectful people like Madam Moderator, like you are, our country deserves that same respect. I do not think it is right for anybody who lives overseas. And now, don't get me wrong. This is not about politics where we say, for example, if the prime minister does that in terms of electoral reform, that he's going to lose. That's not my point. He could still win. If he's a handsome guy and he's a popular guy, he can still win. But do it right. I do not believe someone who is not a resident in Dominica should vote in Dominica. And so I disagree with the callers. And there are other things I would like to say, but for now, I will just leave that as my first point. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. George, for sharing your opinion. So,
Just to say that it seems to me, if I understood the point, is Mr. George still on the line? But all right, if I understood the point, Mr. George was making a comparison between voting in one state in America and another state in America. That is totally different than the situation that we have here.
Yeah. Am I muted? Because it seems to be I'm muted now.
The person who moves from Florida to California or any other state would be entitled to vote in federal elections. What we're talking about here is a person being able to vote in Dominica. So the example that you're giving seems to me more akin to some and also went and tried to vote in the constituency of Wesley.
Okay, good. That's
in constituencies.
That's
So
okay.
Just
Yeah,
for that point.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
yes. Yes.
Okay, good. That's very good. So I really appreciate that interaction. I want to thank you for that. So let me just try to clarify what I was saying. I was not speaking about this sort of one state to the other state. I just used that as an example. So let me be more local and more practical. My point is this: residency. And what I mean by that is if the law says that if someone, and this is for all, and don't get me wrong, this is for all political parties. If the law says that if you are outside of Dominica for more than 5 years, and say, for example, you were to come back to Dominica and spend 2 months, that's not, come on now. You're not a resident of Dominica. You live in somewhere, you sleep in somewhere. And so what I would say is that one needs to establish some sense of residency, and whether it's the Labour Party or the UWP or any party, that we need to have what is called, that someone needs to have a place of domicile, that you live there, you belong there, you work there, and that's it. So let's say, for example, let's just give an example for hypothetical, but it's not just hypothetical, I really mean for really consideration. let's say 6 months, or let's say 3 months. But you cannot come for 2 days after leaving the country for 5 years and say you can vote. That's my point.
Okay, your point is well noted, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Justina, can you unmute your mic and share your contribution?
Yes, pleasant good evening to everybody. Am I being heard clearly? All right. I want to say I think this discussion is very, very, very beneficial to those of us who are not locally in Dominica at this point. And while we are not there physically, but our heart, our interest is in the country of our birth and the country in which we think we want to return to continue to contribute to its development. If I am to raise some of the points that are on the table for discussion, I think most of the people in the diaspora who, from the little that I know, who come down to Dominica and contribute to the voting process are people who also contribute to the development process of Dominica and visit regularly. There may be, I'm not saying there may be a few that probably do not visit as often, but generally, these are people who visit regularly. These are people who contribute in one way or the other to the development process of Dominica, whether financially, whether by way of support in any other form. I think they do their contribution, and I do not think it is fair to them to cut them off completely from the voting process. I also think that the second point is the re-registration as opposed to the confirmation. I think for us to do re-registration, that is going to be a very costly exercise. And if we are looking at the economic situation of the world, we have to look at something that is more cost effective and at the same time can be very, non-biased and cost effective. So it's a situation where we look at the list, examine the present existing list and see how we can, number one, Dominica is a very small country. That is to our advantage, where we know everybody. We know when people die. We know when people are overseas. We know where they are. We know when they leave. We know when they come back. So we are able to give credible information on the presence of people, where they are, and whether they are alive. I think outside too, even in overseas, the people who are overseas, we can also look at a system by which we can look at the list. And I think confirmation in that case, confirmation can be, and we can employ that strategy where the people who are overseas, who are no longer interested in voting in Dominica, they can indicate, and these are not the people who are normally coming down anyway, so they can indicate and we can decide, all right, can we eliminate their name because they are really not interested. You see, the people who are interested in coming down to vote, and these are the people who normally come down as often as they possibly can, they can indicate, look, I am contributing, I am visiting, and I think I want to remain on the voters list. I don't think it is fair to remove me, and I have to prepare this country for my retirement, because some people are still planning to come down and retire in Dominica, So I think we have to look at all of those things and see how best we can deal with the recommendations that were sent to us. But I think generally the discussion is something that is very healthy, something that is beneficial to all of us, and we must look at it without any political eye, because no matter who comes, which party is in power, it's going to have either negative or positive implication. So let us be objective in looking at it, and I think for now that's my contribution. Thank you so very much for accommodating.
Thank you very much, Justina, for sharing with us your thoughts on that. We would like to give the floor to Adelaide Paul now. Adelaide Paul?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from New York. By the way, I don't think there is anything for camera, so I think camera is off tonight. Hence the reason nobody is on camera.
I will ask for them to check that, but I think the feature is there. You should be able to put on your camera.
No, I didn't say, but anyway, it's okay. I'll just continue. I'm Adelaide Paul, and I live in New York, originally from the town of Portsmouth. And tonight my contribution is really, I'd like to focus on a word that I heard so frequently mentioned during these consultations, which is disenfranchisement. And I know that the senior counsel, Astafan, mentioned it quite a bit, and also Mr. Vince Henderson. One second, join us panelist. Okay. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Okay, I think, okay, all right, hang on. Yeah, so I think they changed the setting, but that's okay. So yeah, I'm going back to the word disenfranchisement. And, you know, at the start of this whole process, with Sir Dennis Byron, I recall that the very first thing that was put out was a survey. And the survey was meant to, I guess, capture the ideas and feelings of Dominicans, I guess at home and maybe abroad. I recall doing that survey, and when I started doing the survey, I realized that even when certain answers were put, you could go to the end of the survey. I completed the survey. Funny, I went back the following day, and I just said, for the heck of it, I said, no, let me try that survey again. And I did the survey a second time. And I went back and I could do the survey on multiple occasions. So I did bring it up. I remember being in a consultation with Sir Byron, and I said, the survey essentially was flawed. I don't know what the results of the survey was that determined this particular recommendations, but it would be very interesting to see what the results of the survey was. I remember on Monday night when you, Ms. Byron and Mrs. Knight were having the discussion, they mentioned the word 800. Whether it's a true representation of the entire Dominican population, both in Dominica and abroad, I guess, you know, maybe statistics will determine whether that is a real sample size or not. So we go back to the word disenfranchisement. And one of the things that I just kind of want to make a note of is, I look at the room, and from the beginning of this discussion, and somebody just mentioned something about politics. But that is our life. Life is about politics, and we want it to be as neutral in a setting where every single citizen has a choice, has to be given a decision to make that is going to determine their future and their children's future. I looked at the room, and it was very interesting and kind of sad to see that there was still so many government officials playing sort of like that color thing. You know, we know what color does to us. We live in a society where it is so divisive, whether we talk about at home or even in Dominica, there is so much division. And we sat in a room where we're seeing people who represent the government, who is supposed to be neutral, coming with big red collars. And that was another issue that I have when we talk about disenfranchisement. Another issue that I have with this entire process, some people call it a gimmick. Some people actually call it a gimmick because they're like, after all of this, what exactly is going to happen? So there are consultations with the diaspora, and then there are consultations on the ground. You have consultation in Portsmouth. We know Portsmouth is a predominantly red DLP stronghold. You have consultations in the Kalinago territory, which is also another very strong DLP stronghold, and we have it in Grand Bay. 3 extremely strong DLP strongholds. What about the other areas of Dominica, the Salisbury and the Marigot, and maybe the Kenfields and the other areas where people which may not be so accessible to the people to have these kinds of consultations? We have to take into consideration that the road in the Kalinago territory is not in the best of conditions, especially depending on the time that these consultations are going to take place. So I think when we talk about, engaging our entire population, we cannot disenfranchise a certain group of people, which seems to be the order of the day. Now, this point I think is so critical because I want to talk about my experience and other people's experiences. So again, Mr. Vince Henderson, he spoke about, he said he equated giving a diaspora a ticket to go home and vote
He equated it with giving somebody a ride to a polling station. So that stayed with me, and I really started thinking about that. So in 2019, when that election was called, as we know, we've had snap elections back and forth all the time. So I decided that I wanted to go home for the election. Everybody knows what it is like going to Dominica, and especially going to Dominica on such short notice. Not everybody can do that. I actually had to kind of segue my way through my job in order for me to go for about 5 days to go home for that particular election. I had to buy the ticket, which was premium price because it was a short period, and there were so many flights booked around that time that I guess I hate to say, but the DLP had blocked out so many of those areas that the ticket price was very astronomical. I also had to pay for food. I had to pay for accommodations, and I also got a rental. That in itself came up to about, I would say maybe about between $2,300 to $3,000 US. That's what I paid to go to Dominica during the election from my pocket. All right. When while I was on my journey to Dominica, I met individuals who said to me, I ain't going home to vote. I just got first time I'm voting in Dominica. And I know some of these people had lived out of Dominica for years and years and years. For years and years. So when we talk about disenfranchisement, I hear a lot of people calling and saying, it's my duty and my right to vote. It will cost, let's just say, if we take $1,000, not even the $2,300 to $3,000 that I had to take from my pocket to go home to Dominica during that election. Let's say just $1,000, and we're talking about over 1,000 people who went down to vote. Who were and this is not what I'm saying. This is what Vince Henderson said. He said he equated giving a diaspora a ticket to come home to vote. He said it is equivalent to giving someone a ride to a polling station. And so that $1,000 that I am just estimating that for 1,000 people, that's $1 million US. This is 2.6, almost 3 million Eastern Caribbean dollars. Plus, we had people coming from further distances. I know there are people from the town that I'm from who came from places like England and Germany to come home and vote and were given tickets. When it was time for me to leave, my flight was scheduled to leave that afternoon at 5 p.m. I left the airport. The flight took off almost about 11
So,
p.m.
Ms. Paul, are you saying that persons in the diaspora should not be allowed to vote? Or I'm trying to understand the point you're making so that we can take a proper note of it in relation to the recommendations that have been made by Sir Dennis.
Yes, so, I'm going to get to it. And I go back to the disenfranchisement aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So I am certain that there are many people in the diaspora who would like to go home and vote, but many people go home to vote because they're given free tickets to go home to vote. If we all, from our own pockets, were to take those monies to go home to vote, I guarantee you that not a quarter of the people who go home would go home to vote. So who is being disenfranchised? Is it a particular group of people who have to take out monies from their pocket to go home to vote, or the people who are given those tickets? And that's the other part.
So Ms. Paul, do you have a recommendation?
Absolutely. My recommendation is people who have lived out of Dominica for the last 5 years, they're not even so much, they don't really know what is really going on in the country per se. There are people who have been out of Dominica for 15 years and are given tickets to vote. I think that, okay, you live in the country, you go home regularly, you contribute to the country, you have a certain form of residency in Dominica, then you go home to vote. That should be the rule that we follow. That is what we should, as citizens, if we don't want to disenfranchise people, this is what we should do. Also, if the whole idea of going to the diaspora to register another group of people, here we go again. If you go to the diaspora to register a group of people in certain areas, what is going to happen to the other people in those areas who cannot come to those locations to be registered? So I think what it is when let people come to Dominica. When you come to Dominica, You feel you want to be a part of the voting process in Dominica, you register in Dominica to vote. You come on with all your documents, you register in Dominica to vote. You continue coming home on a regular basis to contribute to the economy, to the welfare of the country. And when it's time for election, if you feel that you want to go home to vote, you buy your ticket and you go home to vote. Not the whole idea of essentially bribing people to go home to vote. So this is my whole presentation on disenfranchisement. We have to think about getting everybody involved in the process, and one group shouldn't have a huge advantage versus another group.
Thank you very much. Just to let you know that in relation to bribery, as you raised it, that the provision of a ticket for someone to come home to vote is not bribery unless it's done with corrupt intent, and that has been clearly enunciated by the courts in a series of election petitions and decisions over the years from many jurisdictions in the Caribbean and elsewhere. So I would like to give the floor now to Donovan Fabian. Donovan Fabian, can you please unmute and share?
Yes. Good night. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. If you wish to put on your camera, you can do so.
I'm trying. Okay. It won't come on. Okay. Good night to everybody. Yes. First of all, I want to say that I'm in 100% support of Dominicans living overseas going home to vote. But before I go into this, I wanted to, in short response to the previous caller about disenfranchisement. Political parties are supposed to be organized and competent and able to assist their supporters with transportation and other issues. So if one party is able to do it and the other cannot do it, that's not disenfranchisement. Because to disenfranchise somebody, you have to deprive them, right? And if you cannot get to the polls for one reason or the other, that is not disenfranchisement. And that's all I'll say on that. Now, a born Dominican will remain a Dominican forever. And there's no expiry date on that time. And with that birth, it comes with rights. And when a Dominican leaves to go overseas, his or her rights does not end. And Dominicans who live overseas are no less Dominicans than those living in Dominica. So the same rights that every Dominican who live in Dominica has, a Dominican living overseas has the same rights. The issue of tax, paying income tax, is one of the most asinine things I ever heard. Because there are many Dominicans in Dominica who do not pay income tax, especially after the government raised the tax threshold from $12,000 to $30,000. So where this tax requirement come from, I just do not know. I know back in the day, before adult suffrage, this sort of things were imposed on people. Poll tax, having property and land, literacy requirements. But people fought and died and bled for these things to ensure that people will not deprived of their rights because of these impositions. So it seemed like some of us want to go backward before adult suffrage, talking about income tax. An American can vote, like 2 nights ago, there's somebody who said that he's been in Dominica for 40 years and he still votes every election, or he's able to vote every election. In America, if you don't pay your taxes, the IRS will get you some way or the other. But your right to vote is not taken away. All right? And I completely disagree with the 50-day and 90-day aggregate that's been proposed by Sir Byron. Because the average American, the average person in America gets 11 vacation days a year. So that means to meet this requirement of even the low one of 50 days, for 5 days, you have to take every vacation and go home to Dominica. Right? People have families, children. Some of them, the only time they get off is in summertime to be with the kids. So I think this is not a very progressive proposal. So I think in our contribution, we have to be very careful that we do not try to violate the rights of other people and disenfranchise people simply because we have an objective or we have a grievance or we have some kind of desire, right? Every single Dominican is equal, whether you live abroad or you live overseas. If a Dominican goes overseas and he or she don't want to vote, that's fine. But when people like me, who is in tune with my country, I live overseas, but I'm in Dominica every day. I listen to DBS, Kyrie, Q95, GIS, everything, Trail Festival, Carnival, and I still don't think these things are requirements. What is the requirement is you are born Dominican, you are a citizen. And nobody should be able to tell you cannot vote for a government that you want to choose. And being away from Dominica doesn't mean that the policy of the government doesn't affect you, because you may have land and property and homes and bank accounts and family and children in Dominica. We maintain that relationship with Dominica. So I think we have to be very careful with this thing, and I also support, like England, or I propose, like England just did, and so did Canada, that this 5-year time limit be removed. Once you are a Dominican, you on the voters list before you left, you made the requirement to be registered, you should stay on the list forever. And that's my little piece tonight. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fabian. And can you just tell us where you're joining us from?
I am in Florida.
In Florida. Thank you very much. Can we please give the floor to Dr. Triffy Margaret Wallace?
Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Good evening.
Special good evening to Attorney General Peter. Hi, everybody. Like I said, I am in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to discuss in this forum. I love the nature, I think, and the tone so far of the discussion. I really appreciate that. A few things I want to talk about are the establishment of residency. So that 5-year not being in Dominica and having to return and reestablish residency before being able to vote. I think that one is stirring a lot of emotion in a lot of us, mostly because we worry about disenfranchisement, yes. And all of us, we love Dominica with intense passion. But when I think about it, and I think, and I try to compare it to the US and the way we vote over here, I know one of the intentions of this electoral reform is to raise our standards to international criteria or levels. And when it comes to residency, you need at least, for many states, or most states, you need at least 183 days of being in a state, in a new state, before you can say or even apply to establish residency. Some states require longer. So I am not averse. I don't think it's a bad idea to have us, even if we are not losing our rights to vote, to reestablish residency. And 90 days actually seems to be on the lower end when you're comparing it to the length of time you need to be in a different place to say, well, yes, I'm a resident here now, because I don't lose my right as a Dominican to vote, but I do change my residency status. And that is the only way I think it makes sense to me, because initially the idea of not being able to vote anytime I step foot on Dominica was very painful for me to consider. But when I look at it from that perspective, it makes more sense. The other thing I wanted to ask was, there was something about disclosure of interest for people on the Electoral Commission, and I wondered how that would be determined. Is there a process, and who would determine that, and how would you determine that the people on the commission have no conflicts of interest? And yeah, that one, I'm not sure if there's a process in place, if there's a process that's being planned to be put in place to assess that. And finally, the voter ID, I think everywhere else where people vote, they show an ID, and it's an official ID. And however we come up with that, or whatever we decide, I don't think I have a problem with whatever we decide as far as ID, but I think that's necessary. I wondered about the passport as an option, because that might allow a quick way to reference, say, somebody from the diaspora, that would tell whomever is reviewing the documentation when you were last in Dominica. But then again, on the other hand, I worry about lots of other Dominicans who do not have a passport. Is that something we would be requiring everybody at 18 to get? Is that a bad idea or not? But yes, these are my 3 points. And in general, I'm very much appreciating the tone of this discussion tonight. So thank you all for the opportunity.
Sorry, Dr. Wallace, you asked a question about the disclosure provisions. Could you just repeat that question again, please?
Yes, so if I understand it well, there was AG Peter mentioned, when he read through one of the items, and the title was Disclosure of Interest for Electoral Commission members on certain matters. And I was wondering, well, how would you determine the members of the commission, their level of interest or not?
Good evening, Dr. Wallace. I think I'll refer to you formally, though of course I am well familiar with you informally. The question that you're asking, I think, is really part of what this whole consultation is about. Remember, this is a draft which has been proposed by Sir Dennis. I can tell you what I think it's referring to. It's referring to members of the commission and the other individuals referred to, who may have, for example, if the commission was considering acquiring electronic equipment for the purposes of the voting system, or if they were considering acquiring software for such a system and that sort of thing. And one of the members had an interest in that area, then they ought to disclose it. It's really the thing that you'd understand in almost any situation. It doesn't define it. It says a private interest. So I would imagine that part of the rulemaking provision that would be provided for if the proposal of Sir Dennis was to take effect, that the rules that would be set out would elaborate on what type of situation would constitute a private interest. But that really is, it doesn't define it, it talks about private interest. So if you can imagine the sort of thing that you might feel that somebody should disclose if they were in that situation. I think that's the best I can do.
Okay, and one would also have to consider what the penalties might be if somebody refused to, or they lied, right?
There is a penalty. It says the person who contravenes that subsection commits an offense and shall be liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $6,000.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for your contribution. Can we have Mr. Z? Mr. Z, if you can unmute your mic or Miss. Sorry, Z. Are you there? Can you unmute your mic, please, and share your contribution?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good evening. Thanks for having me. You know, we've been having these consultations, and I've been trying to do some analysis, and I would say it's been more like 2/3 of the time has been spent on this idea of disenfranchisement, and there has never been disenfranchisement talked in terms of the local people. It's always a foreign conversation. So I don't know. I mean, what are we having these conversations for? Is it for people on the ground, or is it to facilitate something else? You know, and I come at this for the simple reason that I'm in the diaspora. I have never changed my passport. I have a Dominican passport. I'm maybe the only diasporan who's really legitimate to vote in Dominica. You know, and yeah, and I'm asking myself, you know, yeah, as a Dominican, you know, you're born as a Dominican. Your right to vote is endemic to you, but the vote is a political paradigm, you know. It's a political property, you know, which means you carry the vote with you. Your vote is not something that stays inside your heart. You even right here, if somebody goes to a new municipality that's just a street over, they can't interact with the street before that. They live that. So when you take your vote and you move to a different municipality, you have to do registrations for you to vote in new municipality. You have to provide residence. When you take your vote and you go out of foreign, you delegitimize your vote to local, you know. It is not the country that delegitimizes you, know. Your choice to forego the political presence of what is in you for something else has nullified your political process.
I think you muted yourself, so can you please unmute and continue, please? Mr. Z, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself and continue your contribution, please?
Can you hear me?
No, I'm hearing you now. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm saying it is you who has traveled out of the country. It is you who has given responsibility somewhere else. It is you who has made a choice to provide sovereign to some other place. You're voting. Yes, you are Dominican. You can never lose that. You can never lose your right to vote. But you are in access to a different municipality. If you want to be considered a voter in Dominica, you have to reorganize yourself to be a resident of Dominica. That is how the vote follows you. It's not a convenience vote. It's not something because you love. You see, but here's the issue. Here's the bigger issue. The bigger issue is we could have had a real positive conversation where we could have really sat down and decided, you know, let us look at this thing of how foreigners and locals can work together. And if we looked at it objectively, instead of this extreme that Anthony Estefan always has us looking at things, that if we look at it objectively, we'll realize to have an open vote to Dominicans in the diaspora is a disadvantageous vote to Dominicans at home because of the volume realities, especially futuristically. So let us find something, as Yuzi said, let us wait. Let us give a weighted solution. Let us organize that the diaspora can vote in some weighted manner, and Dominicans that vote can vote in a higher weighting, because they're the ones that the government ultimately affects. So let us have the real kind of conversation on the disenfranchisement, that we can really solve it and it can be fair. But the conversations are taking place in a mannerism that lacks fairness. There is a justice environment, but there is no just to this process, and that worries me. That worries me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zed, for your contribution. I'm not clear, however, and if you don't mind me asking you that, the law currently provides that even if you are living outside of Dominica, once you're not absent from Dominica for 5 years, you're entitled to vote. In the proposal that has been put forward by Sir Dennis, he is seeking to interpret absence as not having been in Dominica for a period of at least 90 or 50 days. Are you in agreement with his recommendation? Are you in agreement with the law as it stands? With the interpretation that once you return to Dominica within the 5-year period, you can vote. Are you saying that persons in the diaspora should not be allowed to vote? Are you in favor of 5 or 10-year absence? I just wanted to be clear on what your suggestion is. Are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm there. You can hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, here's the thing. I'm saying, if we are serious about development that involves our foreign diasporan contingent and our local contingent, our laws, our plans in all our areas should be geared towards how we can collectively coagulate these two properties. That should be our overriding in presiding these new laws. So what we should be working on, like I said, is not an issue of residency or non-residency anymore. It should be an issue of what is a fair process of protocol that we can involve both those in foreign and local in a manner that is just to the reality of the ground. That is the kind of law we should be talking about, a law for the future, that solves the problem, not this uselessness of trying to come down and whether you're resident. No, let us put a law that is just. It is unjust, the current law is. That's why it's creating a problem. It's unjust. It's unjust.
Okay, thank you, sir. I see a request from Irvin Andre. You have the floor. Can you go ahead, please, sir?
All right, good evening. Good evening to your listeners. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yes, good evening to those present. Good evening to your listeners at home and abroad. Good evening to members of the Electoral Commission who appears to be conspicuous by their absence. Let me state my position very clearly on this central issue as to who should be eligible to vote. I agree with the legislation to the extent that it says, if you are absent from Dominica for more than 5 years, your name should be deleted from that list. I agree with that position for a number of reasons. It's a position which is reflected in the legislation of many Caribbean, virtually all English-speaking Caribbean countries. For example, most of these countries have legislation analogous to what is established in Barbados, which basically suggests that a person registered pursuant to the legislation, and specifically the legislation is the Representation of the People Act, shall remain registered unless and until his name is deleted from the register because A, he has died, B, an objection to his registration has been allowed, or C, not being a foreign service elector, he has been absent from Barbados for a period exceeding 5 years. That is the lay of the land. That is what has governed elections in the Eastern Caribbean for many years. In my view, that is what should prevail. Here's another reason why I disagree totally we saw what Sir Byron is proposing. In fact, I'll give you two more. One, in November of 2019, the Deputy U.S. Permanent Representative Alex Ludwig, in a statement to the OAS Permanent Council, indicated that the joint OAS, CARICOM, and Commonwealth mission to Dominica in August of 2019 identified 3 central areas of concern with respect to free and fair elections. First, removal of deceased persons and ineligible voters from the current electoral list. 2, issuance of photo ID cards to electors to facilitate more accurate identification and at the polls. And 3, removal from the current electoral list of all diaspora voters who are ineligible to vote by virtue of being out of the country for more than 5 years. And Mr. Ludwig concluded, sadly, the government of Dominica rejected all these recommendations, and the question must be asked, why? Why reject something which has been tried and tested throughout the Caribbean for a number of years? Well, there is why. And we've heard those views expressed this evening. One of your callers, for example, Madam Chairperson, has indicated that, quote, well, let me paraphrase what he said a few callers ago, that there is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong in a candidate or party assisting their supporters in transportation to Dominica. Well, why such assistance? The only reasonable conclusion is such assistance is being given at elections time to enable that person to vote for the candidate or his or her party. That is the only rational conclusion for someone to assist, for a candidate to assist someone living in diaspora to come down during an election. One of your callers yesterday, your presenter, said there's nothing wrong with someone giving a friend a ride. Oh, geez, how gullible do you think Dominicans can be? The attempt to do that at elections time is for one purpose only, and we know it. We know it very, very clearly. They're saying it's not an offense. Mr. Byron, in his own report, said under the Hillsbury laws of England, it is an offense, as the chairperson has indicated, if giving someone, paying for someone's transportation is for a corrupt purpose, i.e., either to enable or to entice or to facilitate that person to vote for you or your party, or to enable that person to have that person refrain from voting. The evidence is clear, the law is clear, but we are seeing a revision. We are hearing a revision of the legislation with respect to the offense of bribery. That is fundamentally wrong. During these hearings, Madam Chairperson, many of your presenters have spoken about disenfranchising. Zed referred to it. You don't want to disenfranchise the voters in the diaspora. And Zed, in my respectful view, is entirely correct. What about the voters living ordinarily resident in Dominica being disenfranchised? Their votes being diluted. Diluted because you have hundreds of persons in the diaspora, many of whom who've been abroad for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, having the ability to come to Dominica, courtesy of a free ticket, vote, and to go right back. I can tell you what the reason is, because it's the same reason that justifies why in other Eastern Caribbean countries, you have that stipulation. Persons who have been away from the jurisdiction for 5 years should be removed from the voters list. It is to preserve the integrity of the vote. It is to enable those who live in Dominica, those who have to deal with the administrations and the hardships engendered by that vote, should have the benefit of choosing which political entity should in fact win the polls. It is why, furthermore, in November 2018, the then Attorney General of St. Kitts, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Byron. Somebody told me that he and Sir Byron are two sisters' children, but somebody told me that's not true. They are brothers. He recommended that the legislation should be changed to ensure that only St. Kitts ordinarily residents in St. Kitts and Nevis at the time of the elections should have the right to vote. And you know why he did this? According to a newspaper report that I'm looking at as we speak, he said, why should 20% of the voting public living abroad should have the untrammeled discretion to decide an election and go back the next day after election? It is patently unfair. So when we speak about disenfranchising voters abroad, in my view, that is the wrong narrative. And for one of your callers to say, for example, income tax is an asinine thing I have heard, how naive, how uninformed. And this person lives in the States. In 1763, the Americans fought a war with the British because they were forced to pay taxes without representation. In 1893, the British killed 4 people from La Plaine and injured many others because the La Plaine people were rebelling against having to pay taxes without representation. Today, in 2023, persons in the diaspora are insisting that they should vote despite the fact that they pay no income taxes. That is patently wrong. That is disenfranchising the people who are ordinarily resident in Dominica. But I don't want to take too much of your time. I can go on. What about, for example, the proposal with respect to campaign finance reforms? In principle, Sir Byron is correct. It needs to be reformed. And the fact that he tried to impose limits is a right thing. It's a thing in the right direction. But in my respectful view, there are 2 fatal flaws with what he is proposing. The first, his limits only applies to the reporting period, as I understand it. And he defined reporting period as that period which commences with the public announcement of the elections and on or about 6 months following the elections. And he proposed a limit of $5 million, which, to be fair, he said, quite frankly, could be adjusted in any way by the commission and ultimately by Parliament. But therein lies the problem. Therein lies the problem. If the commission can adjust it upwards, then clearly who commands the majority in the Electoral Commission have the ultimate say in deciding what is that limit. Your guess is as good as mine or as bad as mine. I leave it to you to answer that question. And secondly, if what Sir Byron is proposing does not apply to the reporting period or the period before the reporting period, then it stands to follow that any political entity can spend as much as they want in that pre-reporting period, which is exactly what happened in Dominica in that last election on about December of 2022. 2 days after that election was announced, make it 3 days for sake of argument, the whole place was decorated with elections paraphernalia. Bands had been contracted. Buses had been contracted to move supporters all over the place. The only reasonable or rational inference to be drawn from that evidence is that an inordinate amount of money had been spent before the reporting period. How fair is that? As Mr. Gilder Richards said a day or 2 ago, it is patently unfair for the Prime Minister to have the election date in his pocket, spending all that money on election paraphernalia, and then catching the opposition, as was said at the time, with their pants down. The purpose of elections are to be fair to everyone and to enable each and every person to be able to exercise a choice with respect to who they want to represent, and to know that, quite frankly, their voice should be on equal footing as any other voice or voices. There are other problems I have with Sir Byron's report, because in my view, it simply does not meet the test set by the OAS. It does not meet the test of fairness. And despite all the protestations we've heard about disenfranchising voters, as Zed says so eloquently, we are not concerned about disenfranchising the most important block of voters, those who reside in Dominica. Let me end, because I don't want to dominate this discourse, by just borrowing a phrase or paraphrasing a phrase from Psalm 23, verse 6. Goodness and mercy, hopefully, will flow or will follow those who dream of a democratic Dominica. And let all of them dwell in a house built on a foundation of equality, rule of law, and freedom from political victimization forever. Madam, I thank you for indulging me, and I thank everyone for listening. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mr. Andre. Just in relation to a number of points that you raised, but I think it might be useful for the conversation for us to clarify a few. For example, you referred to bribery and indicated that certain events that you outlined constitute bribery. But I think if I heard you correctly, you articulated that corrupt intent was required or is required for the offense of bribery. Did I hear you correctly? All right. Well, the point that I want to make is that I agree with that.
Sorry, I haven't finished. You asked me if that's what I meant.
Apologies. Just apologies.
I'm going to respond if I may.
Sorry, yes, go ahead.
What I'm saying, and I don't think that there's any dispute about this, if you pay for someone to come to Dominica, you provide transportation to them for the express or implied purpose of having that person vote for you or your party, that constitutes in law a correct intent, and that constitutes the offense of bribery as defined by Halsbury's laws of England. If you take a different perspective, then you are welcome to do so.
A different perspective, because that's not what Halsbury's laws says. Halsbury's laws says that a corrupt intent is required. It doesn't say that if it also effectively is. In fact, we don't need to go to Halsbury's. We can use the existing legislation, the House of Assembly Elections Act, Chapter 201 of the existing laws. Section 55 defines bribery. The definition of bribery is the shoulder note. And it is very clear that it's the same definition that is in Halsbury's. The following persons shall be deemed guilty of bribery within the meaning of this act. A, every person who directly or indirectly, by himself or by any other person on his behalf, gives, lends, or agrees to give or lend, or offers promises to procure or to endeavor to procure any money or valuable consideration to or for any elector, or to or for any person on behalf of any elector, or to or for any other person, etc., or corruptly does any such act as mentioned above on account of any elector having voted or refrained from voting at any election. That's one. And you have B, which deals with a person who directly or indirectly gives or procures or endeavors to procure any office and such like. Again, or corruptly does any such act as mentioned above on account of any elector having voted or refrained from voting. That is the nub of it. Corruptly does any such act as I mentioned above on account of any elector having voted or refrained from voting. That is this provision goes way back to English laws, and it goes back to most of the cases are Irish cases, and there are cases, and I can provide them to you at a subsequent point, which deals with the specific issue of paying for transportation. In that context, it is paying for a train ticket from point A to point B. And it actually provides that the payment of a ticket is not bribery, nor is it treating. It is not an offense. However, unless you do so with the intent of corruptly influencing the person's vote. However, if you provide expenses, as I see the legislation, as I see the case law, then that's a different matter. But the ticket, the traveling, is not an offense as far as the law goes. And that
well, I hope I get a chance to respond, Madam Moderator.
All right. Let me just before you respond, I don't want to come back with a before. Just also in terms of the residency point that you are making, as I understand it, you are communicating with us from Canada, or at least if you're not, you have connections there, as I understand it. You talked about Barbados. You talked about other jurisdictions in the OECS in terms of the 5-year requirement, residency requirement, and I agree with you that most, if not all, of the jurisdictions in the OECS and perhaps in the wider Caribbean, but certainly the OECS, have similar provisions in respect to the 5-year rule. But Canada, another Commonwealth country, also had that same 5-year provision. And I would hope that you're aware that the Supreme Court case in Canada of Frank, a 2018 case, deemed that is unconstitutional and overturned that 5-year provision. And therefore, the situation as it exists in Canada now is, as I understand it, that there is no longer that restriction on a person who is registered and a citizen. So every citizen of Canada, just as every citizen of the United States, can vote in an election in Canada if they've been out of Canada for 20 years. So if you leave Canada and you spend 20 years or 15 years, or whatever it is, outside of Canada, and then you will tell me if that's wrong. If you go to Canada, you can go and vote in elections in Canada. I suspect that's right, is it not? So why would, so if we're going to give factual and legal information to the people, I think we need to give it completely. The issue, there is a legitimate issue to debate as to whether people who are outside of Dominica should be restricted in their right to vote. That's a legitimate issue, and different people will have different views. We have to let all ideas contend, and then we will decide on which side of the line we come down. But we have to do so with people having all of the facts in relation to those matters. So
I hope I am giving
my last point is I'm going to pause now. My last point is the point in relation to St. Kitts and the former Attorney General. I don't know that we should really be in these situations relying on the view or recommendation of an Attorney General in one state, because it may well be that the Attorney General of Antigua or the Attorney General of Barbados or the Attorney General of Dominica or the Attorney General of St. Lucia has a different view as to what should prevail. The reality is that there are different views and everybody will express theirs. There are several other issues, but I think, the final one that I think I should say is that the issue of the date of elections and the Prime Minister being able to determine that is a provision, as far as I'm aware, in all Commonwealth countries. I'm not aware of any country that it's been changed in. It may have been, but the starting point would have been, as it is in the UK, the Westminster, where our legislation originated from, that the Prime Minister, it doesn't matter, whichever Prime Minister who is in office at the time, determines the date of the election. So there's nothing, that is what happens throughout the system. So it's a bit of cherry picking to want to accept some things that are in other jurisdictions, but not others, those that we don't like. I think we have to be more consistent.
Madam Moderator, you're going to give me an opportunity to respond?
Go right ahead, sir.
All right. Well, let me start with the points raised by the Attorney General. With respect to his definition of corrupting influence and the cases he referred to, he is simply flat out wrong. The fact of the matter is the cases state that if you pay the airfare or seafare of someone to come to vote with the intention of having that person vote for you or your party or refrain from voting, that constitutes the offense of bribery. So Arlene expressed that in a DNA article, DNO, I believe, on about 2012. For his interpretation, Mr. Levi Peters' interpretation of Hillsbury, quite frankly, would not stand the light of day in any court of law. He is just plain and flat out wrong on this. With respect to the Arab versus Frank decision, he knows very well I know about the case because we debated it a few months ago. And I pointed it out to him that the facts of that case are totally different. These Canadians were snowbirds. They lived in Canada and only spent the winter in Florida. And furthermore, they paid their own passage to the States, which is not what's happening here. You just have to count the number of planes on the tarmac at the Charles Douglas Airport in 2019, some 19 of them. And with respect to him saying, I couldn't rely on the opinions of the Attorney Generals, Mr. Levi Peter, virtually all of the islands have that stipulation in their legislation. That is to say, if you are out of the country for more than 5 years, your name should be deleted. That is what their legislation states. There has been no attempt, whether in Jamaica, whether in Trinidad, whether in St. Lucia, whether in St. Vincent, to change that legislation. So to suggest that I'm cherry picking, no, I'm not cherry picking at all. I'm looking at what obtains in the Eastern Caribbean, and what obtains is there and clear for anyone who wants to see it. If you don't want to see it, Mr. Peters, as my mother would say, Zafe Dosa. Thank you, Madam Moderator. I appreciate your indulgence, irrespective of the fact that my views may be somewhat contrary, but I thank you for the courtesy. Thank you very much.
Can I just, and before you leave, please?
You can ask me too.
Right. In relation to persons being absent exceeding 5 years being removed from the register, this is the law as applies in Dominica now.
Yeah, correct.
In Sir Dennis's report, he's suggesting that there has been some concern about how you interpret absence. And as such, he was seeking to introduce in the recommendations that he made that absence should connote that you have not been in Dominica for a period of either 90 or 50 days, so that you can determine whether you've been absent in excess of 5 years. Are you in agreement with that suggestion, or because I think it has been interpreted before that absence from Dominica in excess of 5 years can be interrupted by you coming back, whether it's for a day, 2 days, that would interrupt it. He is suggesting that that period should be 90 days or 50 days. I just wanted to get your feedback in relation to that. How do you see the interpretation of absence exceeding five years?
Yeah, let me give you my...
And I appreciate that it's not the view that you heard this evening, but reasonable people can disagree. I have my opinion based on the reality in the Eastern Caribbean, and that's what I'm going to stick to. In my view, resident should be defined or should be given its ordinary dictionary term, meaning ordinarily resident. You live there, you're domiciled there, that's where you come back home after work.
Sorry, no, I'm not
Sorry.
The ordinary resident point. It says
What point are you talking about?
You've been absent from the country in excess of 5 years. It doesn't really
Right.
it doesn't speak to residents. It says that you've been absent in excess of 5 years.
Right. My view is if you've been absent
Out of Dominica, in my view, and that's just my view, it means that you have not resided in Dominica for 5 years. And in my view, it means that if you visit Dominica within, whether it's that 5 years, to visit your family, to take a sea bath, to eat some grafted mangoes, in my view, that should not count as in the assessment as to whether or not you've resided in Dominica for 5 years. 5 years or not resident in Dominica means exactly, in my respectful view, what it suggests, the common sense meaning of the phrase, that you have not resided in Dominica for 5 years. That's my view. You may have a different view. I respect your view, but I'm telling you that's my view, but not just my view. That apparently is the view taken by a number of islands in the Eastern Caribbean, including Jamaica. So that's my view. I wish I could help you any further, Madam Moderator, but I can't. But once again, I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you for expressing your view. So I would like to give the floor now to Angela Sylvester. Angela Sylvester, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
All right, I'm Angela Sylvester, and I'm calling from New Jersey. Thank you so much for having me. I think this actually really is a great discussion, and like one of the previous callers said, I'm really enjoying the tone of it. Right, it's respectful. Everyone gets to say what's on their mind, and everyone gets to listen. And whether or not you agree or disagree, I just think this is a great discussion. My question was, I listened to I think the last night or the one before, and I'm trying to figure out all the noise around the bloated voters list, and all the talk of dead people being on the list.
Sylvester, we're having a little difficulty hearing you. I don't know if you can adjust your microphone so we can hear more clearly.
Is it better?
This is better, yes. Go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. So my question is, I'm sorry if you hear my dogs in the background, so I apologize for that. My question is, what is the process for someone who has died in the diaspora, for instance? What is the process? Because I seem to recall that there are a number of relatives I know who passed in the last few years, but some of them as far back as 10 years, and their names still on the list. So I think it's not clear to many people what is the process to get those names off the list. Who do you have to report that information to so that they don't keep showing up on the list election after election cycle? So that I wasn't sure after listening to a few of the sessions. So I'm not sure if you can expound a little bit on that. My next point is, of course, the voters registration. I'm for confirmation. I don't think you should take people off the list and then start from scratch. I think you should confirm those who want to stay on the list. Somehow the talk is that when you leave Dominica, you are no longer a real Dominican. So, some Dominicans, some of us who leave Dominica are more Dominicans than people who, we care more about Dominica than some people who live at home. We stay tuned. As a matter of fact, some people can even tell you what's happening in Dominica before the people who live there, right? So we're very much in tune with Dominica. So I don't think our name should be taken off the list. I think you should confirm those, just do the confirmation, and those who no longer want to be on the list, at that time they can opt out. But I do not think people should be taken off the list once they have established that they are registered to vote in Dominica. Again, you need to ask, the question is, what is the threshold, right? How do you determine, what's when someone should stay on or not? Is it the ones who come home for the festivals, blow in and blow out for the parties? Or is it the ones who really are investing in Dominica? Are the ones who build homes, are the one who invest in the banks, are the one who really has interest in what is going on. So I just believe no Dominican should be taken off the list unless they're up for that, right? Yes, of course, we want to consider that 5-year option, right? 5 years, you don't show up, you don't come, we have to look at that option of whether or not they should be on the list. But I don't think that any Dominican, you shouldn't scrub the list and start from scratch. You should confirm those who are on the list, and those who do not want to be on the list, then at that time, you can take them off the list. Because believe it or not, the people who come to vote, you also see them all during the year in Dominica. These are the ones who really come home all the time, right? So if someone doesn't want to be part of that whole Dominica voters list thing, that's their option. They can choose not to be on that. But I don't think a sweeping process should be done to take them off the list, which really is in fact would disenfranchise them, and that would what it would be. So that is my contribution. I just want to know a little bit more about the process for getting people off the list who have passed. So much talk about dead people voting. I think that's an easy fix. We can easily go ahead and clean that out, find out who's no longer alive. That a lot of that will be, the talk will be gone once we get that done. And as far as the list, I think we should be doing the confirmation and not the re-registration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Sylvester. Just to respond very briefly on the point you made about persons who have died in the diaspora, the suggested legislation provides for there to be information provided by the Registrar of Deaths and Births to the Electoral Commission on a regular basis. Obviously, it does not capture persons who may have died in the diaspora. The confirmation process would naturally eliminate people who are dead. In terms of thereafter, if a national ID card is issued by or a voter ID card, whatever is decided, is issued for the purposes of voting, then you should not have an issue. And again, I don't know that there's ever been an issue of dead people voting, but if you have a voter ID card which you must present, then one would think that you would not have any issue of a dead person or somebody presenting themselves to vote in the place of a dead person. So while it would be difficult to have information transmitted by an official source in relation to people who have died overseas, one would have to rely on family members perhaps providing that information to the electoral office. But there are other measures in place that can provide some support to ensure that there is no personation taking place. So thank you very much for your comments. And I would
Can I say one more thing?
Sure, go ahead.
On the issue of the ID card, I have no problem with that. I'm just thinking that any government issue ID would work just fine.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, can I give the floor to Tilly now? Tilly, go ahead, please. Just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to view this. No, thanks for the inviting me in, and I appreciate what's going on, and because it's great. But I want to view that whole thing on a cultural level. I have a different spin to this. I consider all of us as Black people. Black people. Okay? We are born Dominicans. We are Dominicans. We never lose our heritage. We never lose that when we go to foreign, we are half Dominicans. We are always Dominicans where we go. And I find it's very strange for a set of Dominicans to be trying to divide the country by figuring that because we have the ability to go to foreign and do better for ourselves and send back remissions, we are half Dominicans and we don't have the right to vote. To me, that is wrong. And I want to make it categorically clear to the government and whoever is in power to wipe that 5-year business out, because it doesn't make no sense. Because here is it, the white man in America, the white man in England, and the white man in Canada has realized he cannot leave his nest outside there loose. He wants to bring back all his white people together with him. Just take, for example, Trump. Just take for the love of how the white people love Trump. They love Trump because Trump come and bring some whiteism in them and give them a strength, okay? And make them realize that all them people that coming into the America is you, America is white. That's why he's so popular. And we as Dominicans are facing all gerrymandering, all oppression in voting in the states, because some of us are Republicans and some of us are Democrats. I'm a registered Republican because I realized to win the game, you have to follow the white man. So I follow in their game. You understand? So I on that trade. Now we are faced with dilemmas about how to vote and where to vote and this line and you can't get water in vote. And the same thing back in slavery, trying to come back in a smoother way. We are faced with that. The people in Dominica don't know that. But we are faced with that, and a lot of people up here and a lot of diasporas up here know that very well. So for us to be facing that dilemma in the States, and I still have to face that dilemma back home where I born and bred. You see the unfairness? I have to leave my country. I have to go outside. I have to hustle. And the white man still don't want me. But because of certain things, he cannot do nothing with me. But he'll do different tactics. He'll say, I cannot vote here, but this is, I'm close to this district, this, that. We in the States know all about that. And we're facing that dilemma here. And we still have to face a dilemma from Black brothers and sisters that call themselves Africans, right? They call themselves Africans. And they're not trying to add us in. They're trying to eliminate us. Like I was listening yesterday night to Isaac Baxter saying about he bring 800 names and he bring 400 names. You're supposed to help to add names to make us live as one. Let us live love and unity. Let us bring our Black brothers and sisters together. We're not in this tribal thing. Because I go in foreign, I'm not a Dominican and I'm not entitled. Yes, I'm entitled because I do a lot of remittances. All my remittances and everything goes back to home. We from Dominica, we come to foreign to send back money so that we can build homes, we can build resorts, we can build this, and we can make our family better. That is what we're in the foreign for. We're not in foreign to help. Well, we get to help build foreign, but our aim is not to stay in foreign. 90% or 70% of Dominicans in foreign want to come back home. So when you want to come back home and you have that dilemma that people in Dominica, you come from foreign, right now they have this hatred. The United Workers' Party has had this hatred among Dominicans to separate us, that they call us diaspora, and they have this hatred going on from the diaspora. Now to put us under that pressure, we cannot vote. You know what the locals going to say when we come home? You all have no part. You all can't vote. You all this, or you go foreign, or you refuse of the. That's going to enhance them. We don't need that in this time. We need to make all of us one. We need to bring our brothers and sisters together as one. We are Black people. We go through slavery.
Mr. Tilly, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to just get your point in relation to, are you saying that there should be no restriction on persons in the diaspora for voting?
Never, that should be wiped out. No restrictions.
No restrictions, okay.
We are Dominicans. You understand?
Okay, I understand your point. Do you have another point that you wanna make as well?
Yes, I have another point to make as well. Like I want the Electoral Commission to take interest in who they put up as representatives of different, who we can use to represent people. I want them to put educated people on the block. I don't want them to just put convicted liars, and there must be a level of educated people. If you go to high school, if you go to school, you know what I mean? you have that sustainable, you have that knowledge. You can come and you can sit there. I want them to take interest in that. Who that is eligible to represent people. Not anybody just come in there and just represent people. You know, I want it to be. Right now, we're in an educated world. All the youths are smart, especially Dominica. Dominica have a lot of smart people, and we savvy. So I want it to be. I want who come in there to be educational and not destructive, and coming for brotherhood of love. You know.
Your point is taken, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. All right.
That's it.
Well, I will come back again, but for now, that's it.
Thank you very much, sir. I want to give the floor now to Leticia. Can you unmute your mic, please? Okay, go ahead, please. Leticia, are you with us? Your mic is unmuted. You can go ahead. We can't hear you.
Get this. Just a moment. I can't get my camera.
I think there seems to be a technical difficulty with the camera, but you can go ahead. We can hear you very well. Can you go ahead, please?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead. There's an issue with the camera, so go ahead. We can hear you very well.
Good evening. Let me say thank you for this conversation right here tonight on electoral reform. I am in the diaspora in the US, to be exact. And I think some of the best I've heard on some of the changes which should be enacted in the electoral process came from the CEO of Q95 FM. And I'd like to wholly support every one of the suggestions that he made. And I keep hearing people talking about disenfranchisement. Nobody's talking about the people in Dominica who are being disenfranchised because some of us have full lives in the US and we want to come home to Dominica, vote a government, get back to the US, we live wholesome lives in the US, and then the people in Dominica are the ones who have to face the daily grinds of whatever government we put in Dominica and then we leave. Also, it will take a little bit of constitutional change. But I think Rosie Douglas was one of the first people to talk about the diaspora voting. And in light of that, he said virtual constituencies. If the diaspora is to vote, I don't think we should vote in different constituencies. I think there should be two virtual constituencies in light of that. And then you vote in a virtual constituency for whomever is representative of the US in those two virtual constituencies. We are consistently talking about plane rides being paid for to come home. I'm being disenfranchised because if the government knows that I do not support them, they will not give me a ticket to come home to vote. So this is being disenfranchising of other people who want to come home to vote. If you're going to open the floor and give people ticket, give everybody ticket. Otherwise, don't give nobody ticket. And for a matter of fact, I do not think that if you are out of Dominica for more than 5 years, and we have ways of establishing that you should go home and vote. Work with the immigration department. You have not been home for 5 years. Your name, we have to put the legislation in place. Your name should be taken off that list. I do not believe I should be voting. So we're talking about the Constitution here and a few changes. So you mean to tell me the credit union of Roseau has more rights or their laws are higher than that of the Constitution? Because after spending 2 years in the US, I went home and I was told by the credit union I need to put my US address. So apparently the credit union knows what is considered domicile, what is considered living in Dominica, and the government or the political parties don't seem to understand it. Because if the credit union can tell me that I need to put my US address because I have not been in Dominica for 2 years. Mind you, I left Dominica in 2017. I returned in 2018. By 2021, when I came in, the credit union had already told me I need a US address because I am no longer a resident of Dominica. So I want to know if the credit union is of a higher authority than the Constitution of Dominica. If not, I do not think that it is fair for me to be in the diaspora, living in the diaspora, going to school in the diaspora, and then coming home to vote, put a government just for a day or two, and this 30-day or 60-day rule should not apply. I do not believe that should apply at all, because if you're telling me 11 days on my vacation, each time I can come home, I heard some gentlemen speak about 11 days on the of vacation, and then you come home. Come on, people. 30 days and 60 days is not enough time for you to come to Dominica and spend time and actually feel the grinds of Dominica. Half of us don't even know the cost of a tin of sardine in Dominica, unless it is posted on Facebook for us to see that it has gone up to $5. And we're in the US paying 85 cents for it. And then we want to come home and vote a government that will continue to put taxes on the Dominicans that they have to pay while in Dominica. But we are living a pleasant life. Now, I am not for, absolutely not for confirmation of anybody in the US. Because if you're going to confirm people in New York, I do not live in New York, I live in Pennsylvania. Are you going to pay my ticket for me to go to New York so I won't be disenfranchised to come in and reconfirm myself on the list? You're not going to do that. You're going to tell me, find my way to New York. So therefore, there should not be a reconfirmation. You should be in Dominica, where you are registered to vote, you are registered in a constituency, then you're allowed to vote. That is what I have to say in respect to this. And I don't see all the big force. Also, I've heard a lot of talk. We've heard a lot of talk. What is going to happen after all of this consultation? Because what I'm seeing, and I've listened to all 3 nights, and what I have gotten from the 3 nights, it's almost like the Labour Party against, or the government against the people of Dominica. I am not getting that we are going to do this, or we are going to take your word into consideration, or the things that you're saying into consideration. Instead, I'm getting a backbite, a hit back from the government that what we are saying is not what is going to be considered. They are going to do what it is that Sir Dennis Byron gave them, or they happen to work together with Dennis Byron to gain. And I don't think it is fair. I want to know where all of this consultation is going to go. Are you going to take into consideration the will of the people of Dominica? So I would like an answer on that. What is going to happen after all of this consultation? Are we going to hear the government come back into constituencies, sit with the people and say, okay, we had 50% of the population or 90% of the population saying this, so we're going to take that one into consideration over what Sir Dennis Byron put in his draft, which is what we're calling it, a draft, because it looks like a fait accompli, the way people are talking. I want to know if it is truly a draft, or is it going to be that we are going to sit and discuss what it is that the will of the people. Are we going to do referendums for what we cannot decide upon and the people want? This is something I would like to know the answer to, because I'm not getting that in the consultation. But it is nice that people can come and talk, because the impression I'm getting is that in Dominica, the government and the Labour Party is creating an impression for the overseas people that have come to sit and listen, because the people are just there. It looks like a facade that is being presented, a well-made-up face that looks pretty, but nobody is really seeing the disfigurement, which is what the real people on the ground are talking about. So if these people are going to sit down in these consultations and not really go out on the street and hear what the average Dominican is saying, I want to lend my voice that this draft legislature that has been put out by Sir Dennis Byron is not my will and not that of my family and not that of the majority of Dominicans. Because if you look at the majority of Dominicans, 70% of Dominicans did not vote in the last election. What does that say? 800 people. I went in and filled out the so-called questionnaire from Sir Dennis Byron 2 times. And then I heard the moderator debate about it. Oh, it's just 800 people. So what percentage of the population was polled, and does it truly reflect what it is that we're saying if you're now denying that it is worth anything? So all of these things I would really like to see answered, and I would like to see this consultation have an aim and a pinpoint as to what we're doing, and stop fooling around with people's minds, because I'm hearing people talking about paying for. I did not get that from some of the stuff I've been hearing. I don't have to pay $50, but I would also like to see a cap on how much money can be spent by political parties in each constituency. This is what we're talking about when we say we want electoral reform. And according to your electoral, what is it? You're calling it now the new name for it. But whatever that name is, I want a change that is meaningful for me and my livelihood, and for me to come back home and enjoy it. Not, doesn't matter which political party is in power, that these things stand and we make some meaningful changes to the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I just wanted to let you know that the government has not expressed a view on the Sir Dennis's report as yet. And the Prime Minister, in his remarks earlier this week, has indicated that he has reviewed the report himself and he's still reviewing it. And there are some things in it that he agrees with. There are some things in it that he does not agree with. We are in a process of consultation. We're trying to make all views content. So everybody has an opportunity to be heard on this issue. And I'm very glad that you've taken the opportunity to share your views on the issues as well. So I thank you very much for your contribution. Can we please have Mr. Sheridan Gregoire come in and share his views as well? Mr. Gregoire, the floor is yours. Please unmute.
Were you there today? You worked today? Yeah. You don't know your receipt? No.
Sorry, Mr. Gregoire, can you unmute, please? And share your contribution. Okay. Sorry, I think we seem to have lost him. So, he's there? Mr. Gregoire, if you're hearing, please can you unmute and share your contribution, please?
Yes, my mute is muted. Thank you very much.
And camera as well. Good to see you.
Madam Chair, I'm very happy to see you as well. And protocols have already been established. But I just wanted to reach out especially to the folks who are with us tonight from the OAS and the Commonwealth Secretariat and from CARICOM and the OECS. I really am happy that they're with us tonight. And I'm very pleased with the way the discussion is going. People are expressing their views. I don't want to take too much time, but there are a number of points that I really would like to make. I have agreed, wholeheartedly with Dr. Justice Dr. Irving Andre. And I've heard one or two presentations that were made earlier in the week that I wholeheartedly agree. But tonight, I just want to make a few points very quickly for the purpose of the patriots of Dominica at home and abroad, and for the observers who are here with us tonight, and everybody else who's in the room tonight and on Facebook and so on and so on. First of all, I think that the voters list should be cleansed annually, not merely of the names of deceased persons, but of anyone who has not been ordinarily resident in Dominica for at least 5 years. Secondly, unless otherwise provided, the right to vote should be limited to a citizen of Dominica of 18 years or older who is ordinarily resident in Dominica at the time of the calling of an election. And for the purposes of this legislation, ordinarily residence means a regular and habitual mode of life in Dominica, as opposed to a temporary sojourn or vacation or visit or transitory presence. Of course, this does not include the provisions involving Commonwealth citizens, which remains unchanged. I also believe that there should be no overseas registration of voters. Of course, the matter of confirmation of voters is something that should be done very thoroughly, on a very thorough basis, with the production of some kind of ID and so on, whether passport, but confirmation, if it has to be done very, but there should really be no overseas registration of voters. The Electoral Commission should have the authority to remove from the voters list the names of all persons who have not been residing in Dominica for a minimum of 5 years. And Madam Chair, I really don't understand why the Electoral Commission has had so much problem removing dead people's name from the list. It seems to me after how many years that should have been done already. Now, on the day of elections, it has to be an offense for an election officer to ask a voter for his or her ballot before the voter places the ballot into the ballot box, or for any official, any party handler or others to intimidate a voter with the threat that they will know which political party he or she voted for. I mean, this really is unthinkable. Like, why you want to fool people to make them feel that you know what they're going to vote for? You cannot know what they vote for. You have no right to ask them to show you their ballot before you put it in the box. There should be fixed limits on campaign spending, not merely during a reporting period, but also during the 6 months period preceding such a period. Spending in each constituent, that is my recommendation. Spending in each constituency by a candidate of the political party should be limited to per person living in that constituency. Some people might misconstrue that to mean you're trying to tell people they must pay 100. That's not so. Nobody should be asked to pay anything at all. But I'm saying the equivalent of what you should raise. This is a very small country and you have some small constituencies. Why do you need millions of dollars to spend in a thing? And usually there's only 30 days notice after the election date is called 30 days. You're going to spend $20 million in 30 days? It's unthinkable. So we have to find a cap on this thing here. Now, Madam Chair, the breach of any provision of the legislation governing elections in Dominica should be punishable by a fine or custody or in appropriate circumstances, disqualification from contesting future elections. All eligible voters in Dominica should be issued with voter identification cards. The voter identification cards shall contain the name, the address, the voter number, biometric data, could be fingerprints or facial recognition or something, but it has to have the specific information on it. Voting in more than one constituency by a voter during an election shall be an offense punishable by a term of imprisonment. This, of course, is something that was not mentioned by Sir Dennis Byron in his draft laws and regulation, but it should be. The payment of air or sea transport for a person ordinarily resident abroad with the express or implied intention of having that person vote for a candidate of his or her party or to refrain from voting, this must constitute an offense of bribery, punishable by a fine, by custody, a term of imprisonment, or where appropriate, disqualification from contesting future election or elections. This matter was acknowledged and flagged in Dennis Byron's report, but unfortunately, it is completely omitted in the draft laws and regulations that he presented. The payment of overseas or foreign entertainers, overseas or foreign entertainers, not local, overseas or foreign, by a candidate or political party to provide entertainment during an election with the express or implied intention of persuading voters to vote for the candidate or his party, his or her party, or to refrain from voting, must constitute the offense of treating, which is punishable by a fine, a term of imprisonment, or where appropriate, disqualification from contesting future elections. The Electoral Commission, upon the issuing of the writ for an election, should consult with the electronic and print media in Dominica to draw up a timetable for political broadcasts and access to print media for political candidates, all political candidates, to promote their views through the electronic media and to have their messages printed in the newspapers. There is a similar provision, I believe, in the Representation of the People's Amendment Act of Antigua and Barbuda. All parties, Madam Chair, contesting a general election should have equal access to state and privately owned radio stations during the reporting period of an election. And they shall have free access to state-owned radio stations, right? Equal access to all, but free access to state-owned radio stations, all of them. The owner of a radio station who is convicted of failing to comply with this legislation shall be punishable by a fine not exceeding $10,000 for each offense. A fixed amount of money shall annually be allocated to the Electoral Commission by the government of Dominica to enable it to exercise its duties and responsibilities as recommended by the Electoral Commission, to be disbursed to the Commission within a period not exceeding 60 days after the national budget address has been delivered in the Parliament. So Byron did in fact make some reference to this issue. The political leader of each political party contesting an election shall engage in at least 3 debates prior to the election. There is no mention of this in Byron's report, but Madam Chair, the people must know what are the programs and the strategies and plans of these people. They have to be able to tell them that they should debate. They do it in many countries, most countries. Each candidate of the parties contesting general election who is not a political leader must engage in at least 1 debate with other candidates in the constituency he or she is seeking to represent during the reporting period of election. No mention of anything like that by Sabah. But the fact of the matter is, there's a time when Dominicans used to debate a lot. I'm hearing there's a young lady who is helping these kids in school now to do a lot of debating. That's great for the society, great for the future of those kids. The politicians must debate. Any candidate who wins an election as a representative of a political party and intends to switch to another political party, whether in government or in opposition, must resign as a parliamentarian and participate in the by-election to allow the electors to approve the decision to switch sides. Again, so Dennis Byron didn't think he should mention any of this in his report. And Madam Chair, if only 1 candidate is nominated in a constituency to contest an election on nomination day, the Electoral Commission shall extend the nomination process by a further 7 days, just to allow other persons the opportunity to be nominated. And if no other person is nominated by that date, that sole nominee shall be declared duly nominated unopposed. Now, there are a few, 1 or 2 little recommendations I want to make, but these require some slight changes in the Constitution. So I believe these are a little bit more long-term. But I certainly think that Dominicans who are ordinary residents overseas, who are 18 years of age or older, can vote in 2 virtual constituencies. Why do I say that? It was the Rosie Douglas, late Prime Minister Rosie Douglas, who brought this current Labour Party into office. That was his proposition. He said these people should be able to elect representatives who would represent the interests of Dominicans abroad in virtual constituencies. If anybody wants to know, well, how is that going to be done? Just ask these young people who are very versed in technology. They'll tell you it's very easy. You can do something. Ask the young people, they will tell you how to do it. It's so simple. We talk about modernization. This is part of modernization. General election shall be held on a fixed date every 5 years. This provision obviously involves a constitutional change, but it should be on a fixed date. This business of, yes, we know the Commonwealth countries, yes, they've all of that, but it's time for us to change that. We said we want to be modernizing, we want to be this thing. Everybody else wants to emulate in the Caribbean. Let's do that. Fixed date for election every 5 years. The Constitution should provide for a hybrid system of first past the post and one of the proportional representation as a counterweight against the concentration of power or the abuse of power by any prime minister and his or her party. A similar constitutional change was recommended by Honorable Justice Telford Georges in his 1999 Constitutional Review Report. We need to take a look at that. Too much power in the hands of one person. A special prosecutor should be appointed by an independent tribunal or body rather than the Attorney General. I love the Attorney General, but I'm saying a special prosecutor should be appointed by an independent tribunal or body rather than the AG to prosecute any violations of the election legislation. The Director of Public Prosecution shall have no jurisdiction to prosecute election offenses. There is no mention of this, of course, in Sir Dennis Byron's report. The Director of Public Prosecution should no longer have the authority to intervene in a prosecution involving the alleged violation of Dominica's election laws or to nully prosecute any case that is before the courts. Again, no mention of this in Sir Dennis Byron's report, despite the CCJ's suggestion of July 2022. The composition of the Electoral Commission shall be expanded to include an additional complement of 6 members. These additional members shall be nominated by civil society organizations, including but not limited to the business sector, the religious sector, the bar association, public sector services organizations, women's organizations, and local government. And these people shall be appointed by the President of Dominica. Again, Sir Byron did not mention anything like that in his report. And any member, find any member of the Electoral Commission who provides any service to the government of Dominica for consideration, other than being a member of the commission, shall be disqualified from serving as a member of the commission. For example, Madam Chair, we have 3 existing commissions that are citizens by investment agents. I do not think that is right. So, Madam Chair, I just want to conclude very shortly by saying we believe it is imperative to propose these changes to be made as soon as possible. We know it required, these last few require some amendments to the Constitution, but it is worth considering and it's worth doing in order to ensure the integrity of Dominica's elections and to maintain free and fair elections in our country. Madam Chair, I believe that finally, when all is said and done, and that process is complete, and the illustrious people that we have with us, the observers, have done their work and made their recommendations, all the ideas are placed on the table, well recorded. I believe after all that is done and these things are put together, there should be and I'm strongly recommended, and I think that was recommended also by the Dominica Business Forum, which was the only organization that was mentioned in Sir Dennis Byron report, the only umbrella organization. And they should be included in a broad-based representative national committee that should be established to peruse and approve of the final draft electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations that are to be presented to the Electoral Commission, to the People's Attorney General, to the Political Directorate, to Sir Byron, all international observers and regional observers like the UN and OAS and CARICOM and OCS and Commonwealth Secretariat, among others. We should ensure that a national committee with broad-based representative of all those key groups that have been participating in the process, they should come together finally and review all of that. And I would like to get the comments and the observations from the observers on that final draft before the Political Directorate pass it to the Electoral Commission for the final comments, before it is returned to them and it is tabled in the Parliament for debate and for approval. Madam Chair, I want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I hope that this consultation will in fact result in very modern very modern electoral reform laws and regulations that meet with the satisfaction of the people of Dominica, that basically represent best practice among all of what we see happening in our neighboring countries, because many of them have already done that exercise successfully, and the evidence is there. They did it in a short space of time. We obviously spent a little bit of money, I think something like 650,000 or thereabouts to Sir Byron. So we must now make use of his report, and we must extract from it the things that are not good and put into it all the things that we really desire, which will modernize our legislation. Madam Speaker, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity. And have a good
Thank you very much, Mr. Gua, for that comprehensive set of comments. I have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Well, you can ask me, but remember, I'm just an ordinary fellow. I haven't just made a decision.
I know, but I just wanted some clarification of something that you mentioned, and you were talking about best practice and the idea of virtual constituencies. Now, that has come up more than once, and I wanted you to perhaps explain how the virtual constituencies would work. So we have because we're looking at suggestions, and I really want to understand how a virtual constituency would work. So I don't know if you can share a little bit more on that.
I can try to share a bit more, but as I said, you know, we have so many young people that are so
good at technology. If we just put a little thing out there and ask them a little competition, you'll be surprised all these bright young people will come up with something for us. You know, old people like us may not be able to understand, but they will come up with that in 2 shakes. Ask people like Bernard Ito and Thompson Fountain. These guys are out there and they're doing those things. They will tell you this is easy to do. I heard Debbie Douglas talking about this. What can be so impossible about this? I mean, this is just, you understand what I'm saying?
No. I'm not talking about the technology. I'm trying to understand how a virtual constituency would work in terms of, do you have a parliamentary representative for that virtual constituency? How do you? I'm just trying to understand how the virtual constituency would work in practice.
Here's what I think. I think if we
and how would that fit into our parliament as well?
Yes, here's what I think. If we put our minds together, all of us together, this business of dividing and divisive, let's forget about that. Let's all sit down and put our heads together. I might have one idea, you might have another one, somebody else might have a different one. Let's all get our heads together if we really want to do this. We want to ensure that everybody in the diaspora can vote. Normally, when people go to vote, they go and vote in one constituency at one polling station. That is what you do when you go to Dominica. If you're in a virtual constituency, you have to just vote for one constituency. And that is what it is. It is simple as that. So if you have 2, then you find a way to separate by region or so on. So you have 2. How they represent you in the parliament is something else. But remember, that parliament meets what, 3 times a year? So, I mean, is it that difficult for these people to come down and just be in parliament 3 times a year? What is so difficult about that? I don't think that we need, it's not rocket science. And now I've heard people talking about, some people said last night that, you know what, economic citizens should be able to vote, they're Dominicans. Okay, so you have about maybe 40, 50,000 of them now. If you want them to vote, fine, let them vote for the virtual constituencies, right? Because, I mean, can you think about if you have 40 people from the CBI program and another 60, 70, 80, 100 people outside, 100,000 people outside? What is that going to do for the dilution of the impact of the people living in Dominica? So we need to really start thinking serious. If we really want this thing to work and to involve everybody and let everybody, we need to think seriously. I think Rosie Douglas was right. He had the foresight, and I believe this Labour Party, really and truly, they have to take a cue from Rosie Douglas. Even way back then, he thought about this and he did not want to diminish, dilute the impact of the local votes. And he said, but our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, we cannot leave them out. Therefore, we have to find a way to do the accommodation. That is what is left to us now, to sit down and work it out.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. But just to let you know that economic citizens are Dominicans and they're entitled to vote if they meet the necessary criteria. In order for them to meet the necessary criteria, they would have to be residing in a particular constituency in Dominica for at least 3 months in order for them to qualify to vote. So it's not as simple as saying that there are 40,000 economic citizens and they will have the right to vote. Any Dominican citizen, economic citizen or otherwise, has to meet the qualifying criteria of having resided in a constituency for at least 3 months. So I think it's just important for us to note that, and to also note the fact that Commonwealth citizens can also qualify to vote in Dominica as well.
Well, yes, Madam Chair. I did note that when I come out,
But I'm not the one who said that the CBI person should vote, you know. I was only quoting somebody I heard last night.
No, I know that. I'm sorry. I was just providing some clarification. So thank you.
I don't think they should vote at all. That's my view.
You should not vote.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Greco.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, and good seeing you.
All right. Thank you. Can we have Mr. Paul Alexander, please? Mr. Alexander, you have the floor. Mr. Alexander, can you unmute yourself, please, and share your contribution? Okay, go ahead,
Yes,
please.
can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening. As I said, I was under the impression that this consultation was to connect diasporans, because I know there were other consultations held in Dominica for the business people, the lawyers, the politicians, and so forth. So when Mr. Gregoire comes up and takes so much time, I know there are some diasporans will not get a chance to speak tonight. But anyway, forgetting that, you know, some Dominicans, when they left Dominica, they threw a stone behind their back and say they have nothing to do with Dominica. So these Dominicans, they're within their rights, not wanting to participate in the political process in Dominica, not wanting to vote. This is up to them. But I want people to know that electoral reform or electoral modernization is not like Dominica has been newly liberated and we are about to have our first election. So we are trying to see how we're going to go about it to teach people how to vote or to make it be known what the election is all about, because we have never voted before and we do not know how to vote. It's not like that. We've been independent since 1978, and we have voted many, many times from 78 to present. Now, I am in favor of removing time limit for Dominicans living abroad to vote. There should be no limit. It's not like when a Dominican migrates from Dominica, he has become an alien. No, we still remain Dominicans. According to our great cultural artist, Sonia Lloyd, the deceased Sonia Lloyd, she had a song saying, Dominicain, nous tous c'est même. Now just imagine, we are appointing ambassadors, foreigners, to take care of Dominica's business abroad for us. They are not Dominicans, we have been paying them to do that job. And we as Dominicans who were born and bred in Dominica, some people want to take away our rights to come to Dominica to vote. Now, when we leave Dominica, we go overseas as ambassadors of Dominica. We are internationalists. We still connect to the country. You know of so many Dominica associations in foreign, in England, in Canada, in St. Thomas, where I live. And we celebrate our independence every year. Dominicans are some of the most patriotic people in the entire world, especially around the time of independence. And when we have our independence celebration in the US Virgin Islands, in St. Croix, in St. Thomas, we invite either Prime Minister or government official to come as our guests. We also invite a priest or cultural entertainers or musicians to come and celebrate Dominica's independence with us in foreign. That is to tell you how much we are still connected to Dominica, even though we are living overseas. Now, when our election is being held, we bring overseas observers, people who are not even Dominicans, to see how we are voting. So if overseas observers can come and observe our election, why is it that we Dominicans who live overseas cannot come and vote? Makes no sense. Now, all over the world, the governments are making it easier for their citizens living abroad to participate in the election. So if we are talking about modernization and we are living in modern times, the world right now has become like a global village. You are in St. Thomas, you are in England, you can FaceTime anybody anywhere in the world and be in connection, be there as you live in there. I'm living in St. Thomas, I'm also living in Dominica. So we as diasporans cannot lose our right to vote. We have to maintain our rights to vote because this is sacred to us. We have to be able to vote. So I'm in total objection to trying to remove names of Dominicans living abroad from the voters list. And I'm in favor of confirmation because it doesn't make any sense that I have to re-register when I'm already registered. I come to Dominica to vote each election. So I'm not living outside of Dominica more than I'm living in Dominica. I'm still part of Dominica. The things I do to connect to Dominica, I connect in many different ways. Not I alone, but most Dominicans who live overseas, they have not forgotten their country. They send remittances in the millions annually. Western Union and MoneyGram are happy that there are Dominicans living overseas because they're making a lot of money on Dominicans. Cannot count the number of container loads of barrels that come to Dominica during Christmas times and mostly every week, all the time. And this is coming from Dominicans who are living abroad. So I will join the voices of the other diasporans who are in support of Dominicans living abroad, voting in Dominica. And there are some Dominicans in Dominica who don't even vote. While we are talking about disenfranchisement, and also there are some Dominicans, as I said, living overseas who are not interested in voting, but those of us who are interested, no one should stop us. We are not aliens when we migrate. We do not become aliens who live in space. So we are still Dominicans. We are connected. And we're talking about modernization. They're talking about campaign finance. But all the countries with campaign finance, on election day, there is still canvassing happening, like in St. Thomas, on the day of election. All the candidates, all the political parties, they still have their people by the polling station, maybe 100 feet away. As you're going in to vote, they're giving you your posters, your flyers, and tell you, don't forget me, vote for this, vote for me, vote for this party, vote for this party. Now, if you're talking about modernization and campaign finance, you should also be talking about modernizing the entire thing. But when we talk about ID cards, in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, where I vote, I have a voter ID card. But when you go to vote at the polling station, you are not asked for any voter ID card. They ask you for your name and your address. Now they put that in their database in their computer. And when you tell them the address where you reside and they see it's the same as what is in the computer and you give them your name, you just tell you go and vote. But if they have a problem as not too sure of the address you give, then they're going to ask you for your voter's ID card. The way some people are going about the election is like election has become just like maybe we are still in slavery. And it's something like if you do the wrong thing, they're going to take you to the guillotine. They're going to cut off your neck. So instead of trying to discourage people from voting or preventing people from voting, I see the program or the process should be more in encouraging, pushing to see if we can get more people to be part of the electoral process instead of trying to reject some people or cut out some people, preventing some people from voting. So I'm very happy that my call was accepted because I've been waiting for over an hour with my hand up And when I heard Mr. Paul Alexander, I was very excited. So again, the committee or the group that is doing this consultation is doing a great, great job to involve everybody, whether you are here or elsewhere, abroad or in Dominica. And I'm very thankful of having the opportunity tonight to voice my opinion on the electoral reform process, the electoral modernization. And I've heard the term about best practice being mentioned. So if we're going up by best practice, definitely you have to look at how other countries are doing it under the electoral modernization. Modernization means we are modernizing. We are not breaking down. We are not going back to the Stone Age or the Ice Age. We are in this modern age, the age of technology, where we can stay overseas and see what's happening in Dominica and connect. And I heard the mention of Rosie Douglas saying there should be 2 virtual constituencies. While Rosie Douglas was Prime Minister, I invited him to St. Thomas. And at the meeting, he didn't mention nothing about virtual constituencies. He said he's going to push to see that Dominicans, wherever they live, instead of traveling to Dominica to vote, they can stay where they are and vote. They can reference to Santo Domingo. The Santo Domingo citizens or residents living in the U.S. Virgin Islands, when there's a presidential election in Santo Domingo, there are people who live in St. Thomas. They campaign, they do motorcades, they do rallies for the candidate they support in Santo Domingo. And on the day of election, the government of the U.S. Virgin Islands provides schools and auditoriums where they go and cast their votes. And then they mail these votes to Santo Domingo. I have friends in Grand Bay, where I come from, who are naturalized American citizens. And they retired in St. Thomas and they moved back to Grand Bay for over 15 years. And every election, they ask me to send them an absentee ballot that they vote and they mail it back to the electoral office in St. Thomas. So what is the problem with Dominicans who live abroad coming to Dominica to vote? And it's not only in Santo Domingo, in Iraq, after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, the Iraqis who live in the United States, the United States government gave them areas, polling stations, where they can stay in the US and cast their votes for the presidential candidate of their choice in Iraq. So in these modern times, we cannot be pushed back because we are diasporans, we are fully Dominicans. We did not say we are not taking part in what's happening in our country. We contribute full time, and some of us contribute even more than people who are living in Dominica. I'm not there to boast about what I've done or what I'm doing, but again, I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to express myself tonight, and you all are doing a great job. Keep it up.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Alexander. And my apologies for the delay, but we were trying to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to share their views. So I thank you for being patient. I want to give the floor right now to Mr. Ambrose. Ambrose, can you unmute and take the floor, please? Go ahead.
Thank you.
I can hear you clearly. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you. I really, truly appreciate you guys giving me a seat at this table. And as a diaspora, I totally oppose. I'm totally in opposition of those who are trying to put any restrictions on diasporans who've been out for a long time. And I find it ironic that when I listen to the responses of those who wish to disenfranchise people like me, it's just so obvious that it's just been cloaked in hypocrisy. Because if my memory serves me right, it was one particular party that basically started, going around canvassing and soliciting people in the diaspora to come and vote for them. And apparently it seems that when they open up Pandora's box, they're trying to put the genie back into the box. So my contribution basically is ready to ask the question, why try to remove or why try to restrict the diasporans from voting? I mean, as Lawa just rightly just said, it seems like the diasporans all of a sudden we have become pariahs, you know, not worthy of being a Dominican or participating in an electoral process. And the argument that the diasporans come down to vote and place a government on the backs of Dominicans that don't necessarily voted for that government, the insinuation. I mean, you can turn the argument goes both ways. You can say that the diasporans are concerned that rather than have a government on the back of their family members, those who are left back in Dominica, they would rather come back and participate in the political process and ensure that this party don't be the government on their relatives' back. It goes both ways. So in one instance, you could look at it that you might be looking at me as a fraud, that the reason that you're trying to disenfranchise me is because of fraudulent activities. But if memory serves me right, there has never been any recorded fraudulent elections in Dominica as far as I know. So if I'm not a pariah, if I'm not a fraudster, then why are you trying to remove me from the voters list or prevent me from participating in an electoral process if I choose to? Not everybody goes down, not everybody participates, you know? Now, to insinuate that basically that is what we're doing when you try to remove us from the voting from the list. I can give an example. A lot of people spoke about it this evening. My parents lived lived in the diaspora. They're both deceased. They weren't even cold in the ground. Their names were removed from the voters list. I didn't submit their name. So for those of talking about that it's not working or it's not functioning, it works because my parents, their names are no longer on the list. You know? So I'm just saying all of this to say that in the process, I think we've got to look at it in a more, what's the word I'm trying to look? In a more sanitized approach to it. There was a caller before that talked about the unity of the brotherhood and how we all came together. And I think that was a very good point that he was making, because what seems to me change is the language change. And once we remove the peace and love and the brotherhood and the Pan-Africanism language, then all of a sudden it was replaced with derogatory names, thief, volet, and all kind of derogatory names that incite people and excited people. So when you move people away from talking about peace and love and my brother, there was a time when we were talking about bourgeoisie in Dominica, and a time when that just disappeared. When we look at the 70s, right down from the late 60s down to the 70s, there was this camaraderie. The people were sharing lamb's bread together. People going in coups or places that they never existed. They'd be like, oh, what is this guy doing? There was this common language, this language of brotherly love that transcended politics and everything. And there was oneness. The guys could River Street, could go to Goodwill or to wherever, or from Newtown to wherever, and sharing some lamb's bread. And there was this peace, and there was this vibes from Black Power that transcended into or merged or morphed into.
Mr. Ambrose,
yes.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but we want to have other people come in as well to share their views. So if you have other comments that you want to make in respect of specific recommendations, we would be happy to hear it.
Sure. So from the basically, I'll take from the summary of the feedback from the key stakeholders, and I'll jump right up onto the recommendations for the Dominican Workers' Party, where they said, under the challenges and issues, maintain rights of Dominicans overseas to vote. Recommendations, clarification of the law governing voting by Dominicans living overseas, regulations to be established. So it seems to me that it's an avenue for an open discussion. There's not something solid that's locked or written in stone. So I hope in all sincerity, we can look at this and we can, based on all the contribution everybody has made this evening, that we can look at this, really comprehensively and cohesively and come up with the best resolutions for Dominicans at home and abroad. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Can we hear from Paben, please? Unmute yourself and share your contribution. Go ahead.
Okay, good night, Mr. Francine Baron, and the rest of the folks on the panel. I left Dominica on Saturday via the, how you call it, Roseau, all right? And when I entered into the place to pay the taxes, okay, I specifically told her that I have an American passport, but I'm a Dominican, so check my passport very well. She said, it doesn't matter whether you're Dominican or not, you have an American passport, so you have to pay an American fee. So I said, you're joking, right? She said, no. And to me, it's not a problem. I can pay any amount of money, it's not a problem. But the fact of the matter is, what I'm trying to say, why should I be forced to pay an American fee because I have an American passport? Isn't that disenfranchising me? That I have to pay an American fee with an American passport, and it's not a problem for me to come down and vote with an American passport? That was my issue. All right. So I agreed with a little bit, but I still paid. Now I have a few questions for you guys. With the reconfirmation, what would be the requirement if you come to the US or wherever part of the world that you go to reconfirm it? What would be the requirement to prove to you that I am qualified to be re-registered? You get my point? Are you there with me?
Yes, I get your point. You want me to answer now?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Let me just finish make my point, and then I will you'll answer.
Go ahead.
No. Okay. With the voters identification card, okay, they said they will give a national ID card. In my view, a national ID card should be something that is mandatory for every citizen living in Dominica, because you need to be identified. But voter's ID card should be a requirement for somebody that wants to vote, because you can't force anybody to vote. People vote by their own will. If they want to vote, they vote. You understand what I'm trying to say? So I think it should be a requirement for you to have a voter's ID card. You go register and vote. But a national ID card is something different. Now, if we're gonna have a national ID card, what gonna specify, is there any gonna specification on that national ID card allowing to vote? Or if anybody have a national ID card, they can vote? You understand what I'm trying to say? Do you understand my question?
Can you repeat the specific question on voters ID?
Okay. All right. If you have a national ID card, does it mean that once you have a national ID card, you can go vote? Or is there any specific thing that's going to be implemented on the national ID card that's going to identify you as a voter?
I think the answer to that is it has not been specified in what Sir Dennis has presented. It suggests that the chief registering officer would indicate what the requirements of the voter's ID card would be. It's provided for in Form 7, but Form 7 does not show what the voter's ID card will actually contain. And the provision in the draft bill, as I see it, is that the chief registering officer would indicate what should be on that voter's ID card.
Okay, thank you very much for taking my call and expressing my views. I wish you guys all the best. Okay, thank you.
Okay, just to respond to your information part of it, I believe that would probably be decided by regulations of the commission, and I would expect that if you're going through confirmation, what most likely would happen is that you would, if you live outside of Dominica, you would be asked to show that within 5 years of the confirmation period, that you have not been absent from Dominica. That's what I would expect that it would provide for.
Okay, on my first point, am I disenfranchised by paying the American fee, or is it just a tax revenue to collect? Because I'm in Dominica ever so often. I've been in Dominica for twice this year, and hope November I might be in Dominica again, November, okay? And every site that I go to, I have to pay an American fee or a visitor's fee. That is a part of disenfranchising me. That means that you're not allowed. You don't live there, so you have to pay what the visitor pay. And if that's the case,
Fabian, let me just. I think your point is understood, but let me just give you a different story. I've had the experience in the past of having a passport which is not a Dominican passport. And in the same circumstances I was told, maybe I met somebody more kind than the person you met. I was told, since my passport indicates or a certain place of birth, so I think your passport, the US passport, if you just present the US passport, the person would have to deal with you on that basis. If, as I understand it, the way it operates, if, however, you present yourself as carrying a U.S. passport, but, for example, you also have a Dominican passport, or your U.S. passport shows that you're Dominican, then my understanding is that you ought to be paying whatever it is a Dominican fees, because Dominica recognizes dual citizenship. But if you're only presenting yourself as an American, then obviously that's how you have to be treated.
Well, Mr. Attorney General, I specifically mention it to us, then it doesn't matter. But I don't want you to get me wrong that for paying the money. I have no issue in paying whatever money when it comes to my country. I'll give whatever I can to my country to help develop my country. It doesn't matter to me. But it's just the idea, the double standard. That's all I'm talking about.
Right, but that's a different thing.
All right, thank you very much, Francis.
When you talk about disenfranchisement, you're talking about the fact that you have the franchise you have the right to vote. So when you disenfranchise, you're removing the right to vote. So the scenario you're speaking about, you would not be disenfranchised. Okay?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Francis.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Can we have Florencia Scotland, please? Ms. Scotland, please unmute yourself and share your contribution.
Yes, hi, good night to all.
You have a bit of feedback.
I realize that. Yeah. Okay. My name is Florencia Scotland. I'm in New Jersey at the moment. I also have a residence in Dominica. Now, on the voter's ID, I understand they can have a voter's ID with information about the individual. And in case they do not have that voter's ID when they come to vote, I believe they can use any approved photo government issued ID. On the process of the 5-year, that they should restrict you from the voters list, I don't think they should remove anybody from the voters list because we are all citizens of Dominica. America don't remove their people from the list. Instead, they can have an absentee ballot sent to the people that's residing in America or elsewhere in the diaspora, so they can contribute and vote if they choose to do. Now, those that are coming up 5 years, if you know you need to vote or you're interested in voting, it's your choice. But 4.5 years or close to the 5 year, you show your interest that you want to vote. And they should have a database to update this person or these people's voter status. That's how I see it, because we cannot remove our names or anybody like my grandparents, aunties, uncles, because these people came for survival. They didn't just get a ticket and run to America, run to England because it was nice over there. They wanted Dominica was so nice and they just stepped into another gold mine. No, they went because it was almost refugees, always a disaster. Something chases these people away and they had to move for survival. Their intentions are not to stay up here, because I speak to many people across the states, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, you know it. I'm in contact with many. And many people are saying they want to go back home to vote to make a difference, but they are unable to because of the status of their condition up here. Some people can hardly pay their rents. Some people are fortunate so they can stay here and say, oh, take their names off. These people don't want to be here, but the parents brought them up here and they end up staying up here. Most of them want to be back home. They want to participate. So there should be a way where they can have them update their status so they can vote when the upcoming election comes. And those that are already on the list, find a way in a database to have these people get an absentee ballot so they can vote and so they can show their interest and put a part of their self in Dominica, because most of them have their lands, they have their property, they have their children, they have their status in Dominica. So that's my take on it. Thank you very much. And thank you for accepting my call. Have a blessed night.
Thank you very much. We have two other persons who have been waiting for a very long time, so we want to hear from them, and then we're going to have to call it to a close. There is somebody who is registered as Google Pics. Google Pics, do you want the floor? You're muted. If you can unmute. Yeah.
Yes, good night.
Right, good night. Please let us have your name, please.
Okay. Francine, yes, I am Hamilton Victor Joseph.
Thank you, sir. And you're joining us from where?
I'm calling from St. Thomas, Virgin Islands.
Okay, great.
Good.
Go ahead.
I have a nickname. Everybody know me in Dominica as Palo. Great. Now, I have a few things that I would like to say about in this electoral reform. One, I am deeply in favor of the voters' ID card. And the voter's ID card, which I have in my hand at the moment, it gives you your name, it gives you your address. It even gives you, there's an area where it gives you, you can put which party you're affiliated with. Okay, your date of birth, your place of birth, and your district, your polling district. Now, on the reverse side of this ID card, the voter's ID card, you have your national proof of identification, citizenship. So that means your birth certificate number or whatever it is could be at the back of this, and it gives you the date when you're registered. That is the voter's ID card. Now, this voter ID card, I used to vote since 2013. 25th of July, I was registered. Now, after the first year I voted, after the first year that I voted, I did not have to use that card to vote anymore. I just go, as Mr. Alexander said a while ago, you just go, you give me your name, they go through the database, My name is there, you receive information, they give you your ballot until you go inside and cast your vote. Now, you go and vote on an electronic device. I mean, also in favor of this electronic device. Now, this is two. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is printing of voters list. Okay? There is a register of births and deaths that could work alongside with the Electoral Commission that periodically, if it's every 3 months or if it's every 6 months, they liaise with one another, give them the list of people that have died, they take it in, and then they can remove the names that are deceased. That is two. Now, people complain about voters that are dead, people that are dead or voting. But the thing is, what I want to say about this is, has anyone reported that a dead person came to vote? Did they see a dead person from the cemetery come to vote? Or, if not, was that vote ever contested? Because they would have to get the name of the person, the deceased person. They saw that deceased person come in and voted. Now, each polling station, mind you, there are agents for both parties. So one agent from another party, if you don't support this party and you come to vote, one agent would recognize a dead person that came to vote, and you know that person is dead. So I'm plenty of the voters and taking it with dead people. I think this is pure, I don't know. This is my term, this is pure rubbish. Now, finance, raising finances for elections. I think this is, each political party supposed to raise their own finance. In the days gone by, I can remember I am registered as a Labour Party supporter. Everybody knows that. I'm a registered. We used to have constituency meetings at Gota Community Center. I was a registered member. We used to pay dues. These dues used to go to the political party. Okay? We used to raise our own funds. Each party is supposed to raise their own funds. Let me tell you, when you have the government giving monies to a political party, I hope Dominicans, everybody who's saying about finance, everybody, I hope all people that want that to happen, they are prepared to pay the tax, because there will be a tax imposed on Dominicans to raise funds for finance, for electrical finance, okay, for election financing. There will be a tax added. You see, Dominicans have not paid tax in a long while. There will be a tax added for that particular activity. I'm warning Dominicans, okay? Now, I am in Dominica. I live in St. Thomas. My home is in Stock Farm, Dominica. I come to Dominica almost every 6 months. And when I come to Dominica, I don't leave after every 6 months. I spend 6 months in Dominica. Do you want to tell me that being in Dominica every 6 months, within 5 years, I spent 6 months in Dominica when I'm in Dominica, you're telling me that I have to re-register, or you want to take off my name on the voters list? Who gave them the right to do it? Is there a way that you can take the Electoral Commission or the Electoral Office to court for removing your name without your permission? There should be something that will state that, okay, if you remove my name without my knowledge, and I didn't give permission to remove my name, you will have to bear the consequences, because I'll be taking it up with the court. And as far as I know, the person whose name is going to be removed from the electoral list has to give consent that they are no more interested in having their names on the list. Okay? My father died a couple of years ago, And I know for sure, I went to the registry, election officer and told them that my father has passed and I want his name to be removed. And it was done, his name was removed. So if people know that the people have been died, okay, people are dead, and they want their name removed from the voter list, they can go in person to the electoral office and have it done. But don't stay and say on the slide that, oh, they know they saw people, dead people come to vote. I think this is absolutely rubbish. And, you know, no person's name, nobody's Dominican name living overseas, their name should not be removed from the voters list. Nobody. Since you are registered, I can understand after every 5 years, you haven't been to Dominica after 5 years, you are not interested in having your name on the list, your name shall be removed. But in removing my name, I am supposed to know, okay, you are not interested in the electoral process in Dominica, that therefore your name shall be removed. The person's name that is going to be removed should also be informed. Those are my little things that I wanted to talk about. Thanks for taking my call. And I will be listening. I will go to the website, and then any other thing that I see that I want to contribute to, I will do it. Good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. And place for removing persons from the register that allows for an opportunity to be heard. As I said, the report is available online, so you can have a look at it to see what it says. And if you also have other issues, you can also send your comments in as well.
Someone sent me the website. I will go free. Thank you very much.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Our last contributor for this evening is Ricardo. Ricardo, please unmute yourself and come in to share your thoughts with us.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you clearly. Go ahead, sir, please.
All right. My name is Ricardo. I'm from Wesley. I am calling in connection with everybody's talking about. I think that the voters list should be updated or cleansed as they're referring to it. And I also believe that we have how they my God, the wording, I'm trying to get there. In the oh my God, I can't get myself together here right now. Where we have like the process of the 5-year process. How does that really work? Is there a way knowing that a person hasn't been in Dominica for 5 years, and how do we figure that out and get the people off the list? Or is there the legitimacy of somebody being on the list? That's my question. How do we figure out the legitimacy of somebody being on the list? And can we do the voters card, the voters ID card? That's my contribution for tonight.
Sorry, I didn't get your point about the voters ID card. What did you say about it?
I think it would be a very good idea or initiative to start to do that, in the sense of having people come in and register to get the voters ID card, so that we can now have a process to where we know that everybody who's voting is the ones voting. Because I keep hearing people saying about the dead people voting, stuff like that. I don't think dead people have been voting, but at the same time, to curb everybody's qualm about this thing happening, give them that opportunity to see that, well, yeah, this is not really happening, and you're losing legitimately, or you're losing because you're not adequately prepared for the elections kind of process.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Ricardo. On the question of the removal of, sorry, I think you spoke about the 5-year period. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. In the legislation as currently exists, if you have been absent from Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years, you're liable to be removed from the register. And so an objection can be raised to the continuation of your name on the register. Should be investigated by the electoral office, and if it's determined that you have in fact been absent from Dominica in excess of 5 years, then your name can be removed from the register. In the new bill that has been proposed, it includes a provision where the electoral office can write to the chief of police to determine whether, through the records of the immigration department, a particular person has been out of Dominica in excess of 5 years. And thank you, the Attorney General has passed me the actual provision. It says that in exercise of functions assigned under any law relating to immigration, the Commissioner of Police, on receipt of a written request from the Chief Registering Officer for information concerning the absence from Dominica of any person, as mentioned in sections 12B2, 13.4b, and 15.3b, shall supply the information forthwith and in any event not later than 10 days from the date of the request. So if there is an allegation that somebody has been absent from Dominica in excess of 5 years, that can be verified by looking at the immigration records, and a request can be made to the Commissioner of Police, and the information would have to be supplied. This provision is not currently in the law. This is a provision that is proposed in the legislation that has been put forward by Sir Dennis.
I thought I heard about that before a long time ago. That
people had to be in Dominica for more than 5 years or less.
No. That is currently the law. The process is of removing is made a little bit clearer in the proposed legislation. But we have always had as our law, as is consistent with most countries in the Commonwealth Caribbean, that if a person has been absent from, in our case, Dominica, for a period exceeding 5 years, then they are liable to be removed from the register.
Okay. And one more point I wanted to make before I get off.
That I heard somebody talk about the diaspora voting via electronically kind of scenario. I think that's a good idea in the sense that it would cut back on cost of political parties in the sense of having to pay for tickets for them people to come home, where you could have a virtual representative represent that individual or represent that specific party overseas. So I'm in the US, I'm running for labor or running for workers or whatever the case may be. And I say, okay, well, we have the system set up where people who in the diaspora could vote for me from, say, okay, I'm the representative for America for Dominica. I'm the representative for England for Dominica. So, or for whichever party or political affiliation I choose to be for. I think that's a very good idea if that makes sense to anybody.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for your contribution. I just want to say thank you to everybody who has participated tonight in the discussion. I think it's very important as we're going forward that we have as many people as possible share their views, and hopefully coming out of that sharing of views, we will reach some level of consensus on some of the issues. So thank you all very much, and I wish to say good night to you. Thank you very much.